James Bond Agent 007 is back on the screen of this theatre soon in his latest action-packed adventure on Her Majesty's Secret Service. The song that's featured in On Her Majesty's Secret Service is All the Time in the World, sung by Louis Armstrong and brought to you now on the United Artists Records recording.
Time in the world, time enough for life to unfold all the precious things love has in store. We have all the love in the world. If that's all we have, you will find we need nothing more. Every step.
The following is a paid advertisement. Really? A paid advertisement? Wait, the B-Movie Cast got paid? Yes, the following is a paid advertisement. This episode of the B-Movie Cast is brought to you by the estate planning services of Twyla Minear Brooks, attorney at law. Remember, when the zombie apocalypse comes, things will move pretty fast.
The body should be disposed of at once, preferably by cremation.
Well, how long after death, then, does the body become reactivated?
It's only a matter of minutes.
Minutes? Well, that doesn't give people time to make any arrangements.
Oh, you're right. It doesn't give them time to make funeral arrangements. The bodies must be carried to the street and burned. They must be burned immediately. Soak them with gasoline and burn them. The bereaved will have to forego the dubious comforts that a funeral service will give. They're just dead flesh and dangerous.
So don't leave your estate planning needs until the last minute, because you don't know when that last minute could come. Call Twyla Minear Brooks, attorney at law, at 859-351-2294. That's 859-351-2294. Remember, when you go, you don't want people saying,
"Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up."
Twyla Minear Brooks, attorney at law, is licensed for practice in the state of Kentucky. Consult your local attorney for matters outside of the state of Kentucky.
Command Mark, the time will be running at X-20 seconds. Mark, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
Spawned by the continuing decline and fall of society as we know it, and created on the second-floor spare-bedroom studio in the Piedmont of South Carolina. Podcasting on a shoestring budget and changing the world one freak at a time. It's the B-Movie Cast with your host, Vince Rotolo.
From coast to coast and worldwide via the internet, this is the B-Movie Cast, the podcast of unusual film and television.
So, on with the show. Hi, guys, and welcome back to the B-Movie Clubhouse for episode 488 of the B-Movie Cast. Before I go any farther, I want to get our contact information out of the way. We love hearing from all of you, so we have a feedback segment devoted to your comments and suggestions, and this is how you can contact us. Option 1, pick up your phone and dial 888-936-0808. This is a toll-free number and a very easy way to leave a voice message. Option 2, you can make your own MP3 file and send it in to bmoviecast@gmail.com. Or use your smartphone voice software and record a call, then just send that in as an attachment instead. Or option 3, if you're not into talking, you can just shoot us an email to bmoviecast@gmail.com. Our website is bmoviecast.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast. It's free, and there you can join us on the Facebook B-Moviecast fan page and letterbox. Also, you can play the contest by sending in your answer by email to bmoviecast@gmail.com with contest in the subject line. And check out the links while you're there, or buy a t-shirt. I currently have smalls to 4Xs. If you want to help us financially, there's a donation box you can click on as a supporter on the Lugosi, Karloff, Agar, and the infamous Xanadu level through PayPal. Also, the easiest way to donate is to click on the Amazon bar on the right side of our homepage. This Amazon link will take you to Amazon.com to make your purchase. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can still log into your personal accounts when you get there. It's completely private, so think about us before you buy online. So now, through the miracle of modern technology and thousands of miles of wires, server farms, PCs, Macs, the Internet, and duct tape, we have our co-host from Lexington, Kentucky, author, editor, screenwriter, film producer, Nick Brown. He has a new website. It is authornickbrown.com. That's AUTHORNICBROWN.com. He is the author of the Werewolf for Hire book series, starting with Blood Curse. He's also selling a book in collaboration with his wife, Fiona, the B-Movie Cookbook. All of these are available on Amazon. He's produced 2 movies, Wretch and Loss Prevention. Both can be ordered on Blu-rays or DVDs through Amazon. He is also the producer of a 3rd film, the soon-to-be-released Fall of Usher. Also joining us today is a fan favorite, the extraordinary photographer and our good friend from London, Mark Mawston. Get website is markmawston.com. That's MarkMawston. You can also buy his work on rockarchive.com, the world's finest print archive specializing in rock and roll imagery, featuring some of the most famous rock photographers on the planet. Mark's photographs have been featured in many of the leading titles in the music press, such as Mojo, OMM, and Music Collector. His work can also be seen in books such as I Was There, 50 Gigs That Changed the World, as well as most of the leading nationals, such as The Times, The Guardian, The Telegraph, and The Independent. His shots have appeared on CD and DVD covers and liner notes. Also joining us a little later will be Jonathan Sadler. John Sadler founded and runs Magus Films, an independent film development and marketing agency. He's worked in the industry for 30 years, starting out as a video buyer for a couple of retail chains before moving to Universal Pictures in 1998 as a film product manager. His dream was to manage the release of a Bond film, narrowly missing the opportunity in the late 90s to be the James Bond product manager for MGM Home Video in the UK, but has since worked at Arrow Films, Revolver, and Momentum Pictures. His favorite film is On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Well, that's convenient, since that's the movie we're doing today.
Very true. And thank you, Mark, for hooking us up with this.
Now, John and I go back. We know each other through home entertainment, and we have had quite a few adventures together. John was just the best guy to know. He's the guy who got me involved with the Everything or Nothing documentary. Because of his contacts, he knows everybody, and so him and I have sort of best chums and have remained so. He even got me onto a couple of video shoots when he was working for Momentum, and we went out to Ibiza, and we had the best time. Well, I know I did. We went to, because of what it was this girl called Jane Middlemas, who was big at the time on one of those celebrity get me out of here type things. You know, she was one of the reality show queens. And we went out there. She came from my neck of the woods, so I could talk back to her in a pleasant way. And I went out as photographer, and we hit every nightclub. I think we did something like 6 nightclubs in one night. And it was just, so I saw the greatest part of Ibiza at the absolute peak, sort of in one night, which was hilarious. And then we did all those photo shoots out on the beaches the next day. And when John comes on, he'll remind me of a couple of those. But we've known each other for a long time, and he's got me on lots of very good sort of shoots and, and into, as I say, into Everything or Nothing. So, yeah, he is a very good guy to know.
He worked with Arrow?
Yeah, well, he was the guy, when Arrow were getting sort of bigger and bigger, he was the guy who was, he'll tell you all about it, but he was the guy who really sort of helped get them, on the map, so to speak, and obviously down to what they bought. But he was an integral part of Arrow, back in the day, and obviously I was a huge fan of what Arrow released. So so he's been involved in everything from all the cool stuff. Him and I used to just sit in the pub and talk. What are the best films to buy on home ends? What the distributor should buy? What hasn't been released for years? that kind of thing. So yeah, so he's a lovely person to sit down and have a drink with, and as I said, we've become very close friends and remain so for 20 years.
Okay, today's movie is a Mark pick. It's the second in our Christmas series, and the third in our B is for Bond series. It's On Her Majesty's Secret Service from 1969, directed by Peter R. Hunt and starring George Lazenby, Diana Rigg, and Telly Savalas. I actually had to ask Nick why we're considering it a Christmas movie, because I totally missed the entire Allergy Institute sequence that was at Christmas. That just went right over my head. But
all the Christmas trees,
there's a Christmas tree there, Christmas tree songs are playing, and they're at a skiing resort. And all right, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Mary's on a lot of drugs right now, Mark, and unfortunately, they're not the drugs she's normally on. These are different ones, so, they're actually doing things to her, and one of them is she doesn't see Christmas. It's very weird. She's gone Christmas blind.
So it's like snow blindness, but with Christmas and movies.
Yes. Yeah. I have to say, I love the action sequences in this film.
It's funny enough there. It's not so much the action sequences that this is the Bond film's known for. It is by far and away the most human of all the Bond films, bar, obviously, and we might as well touch onto it now, No Time to Die. Because obviously you guys hadn't seen it when I last spoke to you. I was very, very, very much on the fence after seeing it. Thoughts on that before we get into Majesty's Secret Service? What did you think?
It's okay. First off, Mary, have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Do you care if we're going to talk about it in great detail?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. I didn't think she'd care, Mark. I'm going to go ahead.
Let's warn anyone who hasn't seen it. Now's the time to skip. Because
yeah, that's it. This is your No Time to Die spoiler alert. Don't say we did not warn you. Yep. Okay. So
because it's coming out in home entertainments in something like 10 days. And if people are keeping it for the Christmas movie to watch, if they didn't see it at the cinema, then please fast forward 5 minutes or so.
Oh, so I can watch it in 10 days.
Yes, it's out now on streaming, actually. In America,
you could stream it right now if you wanted to pony up a little cash, Mary.
Oh, okay.
Even though it is now the third biggest film in UK cinema history, and when you think about it, with the lockdown and everyone, people frightened about going back to the movies for certain reasons, that's quite an achievement. It's quite incredible when you think about it.
It is.
It's overtaken Spectre, and it's now up there with Skyfall, and I'm trying to think what the top one is, actually. It might be Star Wars. But, one of the last entries in Star Wars, I think that might be the biggest one. But there you go, yeah, so it's done incredibly well.
Well, and, okay, it's funny because you said you were on the fence about it, and I hadn't seen it yet. So when I went to see it, I kind of in the back of my head, I said, okay, Mark Mawston's on the fence about this. I wonder what's going on. And so I start watching the film, and first off, I have to give kudos to the modern Bond filmmaking team that they've taken a story and kind of carried the arc for 15 years. Since Casino Royale came out in, 2006?
That's right.
And here we are 15 years later. And by the way, I'm pretty sure if you don't count Never Say Never Again, that makes him the longest run as a James Bond, not
it's
number of
continuous
films.
Run by one actor in a role, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, 15 years as Bond is... Granted, they were only coming out with a movie every 3 years or so, but still.
You've got to remember that the Connery ones were out every year, so 62, 63, 64, 65, 67. So, they were much quicker turnaround in the Connery years. And, when Roger Moore was in, they were every 2 years. But then again, Man with the Golden Gun was rushed into production after Live and Let Die and came out the following year in 74, and you could tell. Because obviously the production values and everything for a Bond film were way lower. So that's why they came back with such, panache in 77 with Spy Who Loved Me. But yeah, for a run, and in amongst that, you've obviously got longer breaks, but bless not as much as Timothy Dalton, who was due to have 3, and it just went on and all the litigations. They were so against him. So it wasn't, the last one was 89 to 96 before GoldenEye came out. So imagine waiting that long. it's incredible when you think about it.
Wow, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, it was 89 to 96 because I was actually working in the
95.
cinemas when the last Timothy Dalton Bond film came out. And
that was 89, License to Kill. And then it was 95, wasn't it, when GoldenEye came out? So it's a hell of a wait.
Yeah, because I was living in Japan teaching English when GoldenEye came out. But yeah, so big change there, but also just a long gap.
It's worth mentioning, Nick. You've gone on about and you absolutely nailed everything on the head when you say that they've kept the story arc going. Let's not give away the ending of this film because I really don't want to do that. But it's an ending that I have to say I disliked intensely. I really disliked it. And I came out the cinema and Emma thought it was probably up there with the best Bond films. She says it's not as good as Casino Royale, but it's definitely his second best.
Wow.
I think John thinks it's his second best as well. I came out of there thinking there were several things that they could have done to ease the ending or make it a little bit better for those who are in shock or whatever, including myself. Because the whole reason for every directorial changes and everything hinged on this ending, and yet it still happened. And I thought, hang on, they sacked Danny Boyle for this idea, yet they're still doing it. I just didn't get it. I just did not get it, and I didn't think it worked. And I came out of there and, just disliked it. And, normally I would go and see a Bond every week. Now, I'd obviously, because I was going into hospital for an operation, I hadn't gone to the premiere at the Royal Albert Hall, which was the first time I'd never done that in any of the Daniel Craig. So obviously, I'd photographed Daniel Craig. I was one of the first people to ever see him as James Bond, as we touched on before. So there's been a lovely affinity with the Daniel Craig cycle of films, bar Quantum of Solace, which I just always avoid and try to forget. But, it's been a lovely sort of ride for me because I've been, involved with it. And then when Skyfall was coming out, I was doing the Everything or Nothing documentary. So, that was the most amazing time, 50 years of Bond. It was such an exciting time. I went in to do that Everything or Nothing because originally they interviewed me for it. And I was going to be the only non-cast member or writer in the whole movie because I'd done all the stuff with the director, Stephen. But in the end, I was cut out, and as I said, Kevin Costner ended up on the cutting room floor, and rightly so, because it would have spoilt the run of it, because it was all about the people involved, and it was mostly about Broccoli and Saltzman, as well as Fleming. It was about those three, not so much everybody in the peripheral sides of things. So I was sort of kind of glad they did that. But I sat in the chair in front of the cameras to be interviewed for Everything or Nothing. It was still warm from Daniel Craig being sitting in it.
Wow.
So all of his interview was done just before me. So it was such an exciting time. So I've always had a very big affinity with Craig.
Did you get to meet him?
He's a Bond that was the closest to my age when he's been playing it as well. So he's pretty close in age. So I thought that was cool.
Did you get to meet him?
You what, sorry?
Oh,
yes. Well, yeah. Well, I've met him when he came onto the dockside, when he very first came up as James Bond. Ooh. And I've been to several, things with him since, yeah. So I've met every James Bond. I've been very lucky. Wow. I've met every single one of them, from Connery upwards.
See, to me, he's the sexiest one.
Who's the sexiest? Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it all depends, because there's as I said to you before, my daughters would be so pleased with this non-binary question that you're giving me. They'd be so chuffed that I'm not the Neanderthal they make me out to be. So the sexiest Bond would be, I would say, it has to go to Connery because he's just got the swagger. He's got the style. He was taken on as Bond because he walked like a panther. I don't think there's anyone quite has that aura of danger that Connery had. I really like Dalton. And I think he's hugely undervalued. And, and I may have touched on this before, but Dalton never gets the kudos he deserves because everyone goes on about how Craig took it back to basics in Casino Royale. Dalton had already done that. He'd read every single one of the books. He'd studied it. He'd gone into Fleming's notes on it. He really did bring that character back to the essence of the books. And he did this thing, and it's in that documentary where he says, Bond isn't for children. Bond is a lethal killer, and that's what I wanted to bring back. I wanted to bring back the smoking. I wanted to bring back the danger, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
And you look at License to Kill, which is an amazing film, although now it looks a bit like an episode of Miami Vice. It really is an interesting film. in Sanchez, one of the greatest villains in the Bond series. Robert Darby is superb in that, you know. And the thing is that one of the major problems I had with No Time to Die is I really didn't think that the villain was strong enough. I really didn't. And I just thought he's weaker than, you know, and I've spoke to a couple of people and they're expecting him to go into a Queen song. I just don't think he was right, and I think he was weak. The problems that I had with it were obviously the ending, which we're not going to go into. I had a huge problem with the villain. I didn't think if anyone was Bond, he's so weak. You know, he's up there with Elliot Carver as one of the most ineffectual villains ever. You know, I didn't like him. And I thought the titles were just awful. You know, the opening titles by Danny Clement are normally incredible, and they're incredible in Casino Royale and nearly everyone. Again, Quantum of Solace, not very good in that, but that was another company doing that. But, you know, I just thought, what's going on here? However, as you said, Nick, kudos to them, because the opening 15 or 20 minutes is just wonderful. It's some of the best Bond stuff ever, you know, and I have to say that I'm not going to go, you know, off on a one now saying that I truly hate it, because I went back up to Newcastle and I took my parents and my sister to see it, which is the first time we've all been to the cinema probably together with my sister for about 40 years. So it was an amazing time. We were in this really wonderful cinema right at the front, sat there, you know, and watched it. And I have to say I enjoyed it far more the second time. Because I kind of knew what was coming, I could appreciate it now. And I could sit back and think, right, okay, this is what's going to happen, but be prepared for it. And I spotted a few more things, and where I thought there were plot holes, I picked up on it a lot more. The problem with No Time to Die is because it's such a long film, there are so many things that you have to listen out for, and I'd missed a couple of them, you know, and I'd gone to get a coffee or something, and I'd come back, or gone to the loo or something, and I'd missed an important scene, which is, again, why it needs to be sat down and watched at home. I think that would be a good place to see it again if you haven't seen it at the cinema, because that's the place to see it, because it's a very cinematic Bond. But when John comes on, he gave the best explanation for it, because I said to him, John, I didn't like it, and he was shocked because he loved it. And he said, yeah, but what you've got to look at it, he said, this is the Craig universe within the Bond franchise. And he said, this is the arc, exactly what you said, Nick, this is the arc of the Craig franchise, and it's a self-contained series within the series. And I said, yeah, but that doesn't make sense because it broke the cardinal rule. And he said, yes, but, you know, Bond's faces have changed over the years. We've never questioned that. And all we've got to do is to look at the Craig era in this little umbrella that it is. And I think the Craig universe is the best description you can have for explaining this film, I think. But, you know, again, so you were starting, you said before I went off on a ramble, trying not to spoil it for anyone. But...
No. And I think you hit the nail solidly on the head with that about it being the Craig universe. And I think you said John was the one that said that, and I think
he did, yeah.
He's right. When I see a James Bond film, okay, you've got Spider-Man No Way Home getting ready to come out. And that's introduced the idea of the multiverse into the Marvel universe, essentially.
I'm supposed to be going to that. I'm out of interest. I'm supposed to be going to a special screening of that on Tuesday, and I think Tom's going to be there.
I hate you.
At Sony itself. Yeah. But I'm not sure if I'm going to go because of all this this virus stuff going on. But yeah, they're having a special canopies and everything, and the first ever screening of it with Sony's on Tuesday. So I'd like to go, but you know, that's by the by. See.
I'm gonna tell you how you can go, Mark.
Okay, you tell me.
Okay, you know they have those inflatable T-Rex suits?
Yes.
Yeah, well, you get one of those, and you just put a mask over the little fan in the back so that it's filtering the air coming in. And you just wear that, and you just sit in the theater in that inflatable suit. It'll be like a hazmat suit, and you will be noticed.
Yeah, I mean, it's the drinks they've got all these. It's at this amazing place in London, and it is incredible. This place, it has a bowling alley and everything inside, and this amazing cinema. And they're having all these great canopies and drinks and champagne and everything beforehand. So, yeah, I'm desperate to go, but at the same time thinking, you know, should I skip that and just watch the movie with my mask? So who knows? So you're masked up in a masked movie, so to speak, you know, Spider-Man masked movie. Talking about that mispronunciation there, I've got to ask, do you guys get Superman and Lois over there?
We do.
Oh, I absolutely love that program. I think it's great.
I have not started watching it.
I haven't either.
I think it is absolutely wonderful. I mean, you know, the huge disappointment that's been the last run of Doctor Who. Oh, my word, it's just all over the shop now. It just does not make sense. She really is annoying now. And I used to really, you know, I thought, kudos, they're doing all of this, it's fantastic, but oh my word, it's just all over the shop. It's like they're trying to do the greatest hits on Doctor Who now and trying to squeeze everything in. And if you're confused as an adult, imagine what kids are going to be like. They're not going to know what's happening. And they've brought all of these great baddies in, but they don't know why they're there.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't explain what they do. They just, you know, talk about too many cooks. They're trying to do this. They're just trying to do too much now, and it's a real shame. And, you know, and at one time, Doctor Who, if you had any write-up in a magazine, it would always say, "Great, tonight's the new Doctor Who," and it was always a big thing. Now they get Doctor Who's on tonight. That's it. That's all it gets. And I think people are. The kids won't watch it because they can't stand the way she acts. She talks.
I'm like that. I have them all on my DVR.
But I'm their father. Surely they should get used to that. But you know, it's just it's just weird that she does. It's just all over the shop. She talks too quickly. They try to jump start everywhere. You can't follow a story thread. And you're thinking, you know, just be simple. Go back to just having one. These were little horror stories in themselves. You know, don't try and bring in 4 different time zones and 4 different types of character all the time. You know, and stop trying to be so PC about everything. You know, it's just crazy, and I just dislike it intensely. But this Lewis and Clark, I think, is quite wonderful. The way they've brought it, and they've humanized the character as well, which I think's truly amazing. And I love the interaction with the kids as well. It's like a family drama, but you know, under the DC banner. I think it's quite wonderful. So yeah, I just wanted what your thoughts were on it.
Well, now I need to go see it. That's my thought. Well,
honestly,
you know,
it's huge. But you were saying, sorry, Nick, I've gone off on one. You went back. You were saying about Spider-Man having its own universe, and you're right, the multiverse and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think about it the same way though, because they, you know, one of the things that they keep, you know, if you watch the trailer for Spider-Man: No Way Home, you see, you know, Dr. Octopus from the Tobey Maguire. Was it Tobey Maguire? Yeah.
Yeah,
but
it was.
Yeah, from his Spider-Man, that villain is there. We've got villains from that other guy who played Spider-Man for a while, and I never even saw the movies. But the idea is that they're making those. They're taking it and running with it and saying those were different universes.
Yeah.
And this is all crossing over. And I think the James Bond series, I look at it exactly like that. These are different universes. This is Bond in this universe. This is him in this one. And you're right, Timothy Dalton really did nail the gritty Bond on the head, I think, when he did The Living Daylights and License to Kill. But I think people were seeing James Bond at that point. And let me rephrase this. The people who go to see the movies the most, which are teenagers and, you know, 20-somethings, generally speaking, they were looking for Roger Moore James Bond because that's what they grew up watching. Mm-hmm. And older folks were looking for Sean Connery James Bond, but I think at the end of the day, Timothy Dalton came at a bad time is what it boiled down to. And I think when they finally did bring Pierce Brosnan in, that gap had allowed the waters to settle maybe a little bit. You know, if they brought him in 91, for example, I don't know if it would have worked because people would have been like...
I'll tell you why it wouldn't have worked, Nick, because at the time in Great Britain, there was this huge resurgence of music, and it was called Britpop and everything else. It was a huge time, and you had Pulp, Blur, Oasis, all these amazing bands. Everything about was Great Britannia again. It was the coolest place to be on the planet was London in 95 and 96. It was an amazing time. Everything worked. Everything clicked. You had the Euro 96 sporting tournament, which was wonderful. Everyone was brought together. It was the era of the lad, and you had all these magazines out called Loaded and stuff, which concentrated on classic stuff like footballers like George Best, very English things, and they celebrated Michael Caine. The Italian Job was again one of the most talked about movies. So it was the perfect time for Bond to land, especially in the guise of Pierce Brosnan, who did a great job. I always think GoldenEye, everyone says that's the best Pierce Brosnan film. I actually really like Tomorrow Never Dies, but he was the perfect Bond at the time. Pierce is a great Bond who never got a great movie, I think, because there are certain parts of each movie that don't quite work. And I think that, he was never given the chance to really shine. There's parts of the movies, like, the opening of Die Another Day before it gets into the invisible car and the terrible CGI tsunami. There are parts of that which were great, the very dark opening with the torture scene and everything. And had Brosnan been given a movie like that, or a movie like Casino Royale, I think he may have shone. But again, I think he was a bit too much of a smooth operator, whereas, Craig came in and wasn't the most attractive and people were saying, the blonde Bond thing and everything else, but he looked different. But it was because he was a new character, and this is why Her Majesty's Secret Service works, and why No Time to Die works. It's because, or Casino Royale, is because it was a new Bond. Therefore, you could do different things. There is no way that you could see Sean Connery doing this now. I mean, it would have been great. Sean Connery was really keen. It's the one thing in interviews he said, I would love to have done on Her Majesty's Secret Service because that's the best book, rather than You Only Live Twice at the time. But it was brought forward because of everything that was going on with the Thunderball. So they had to do Thunderball, and they had to bring everything forward and change it all around because of the court cases there. So he was supposed to be going to do Her Majesty's Secret Service. But when you think about it, the way the story is and the fact that he's seen Blofeld again but he doesn't recognise him is the first example of the Bond universe. Because when they were going to do Her Majesty's Secret Service, he was supposed to be having plastic surgery. So Blofeld wouldn't recognise him. But they just didn't away with that because they thought, right, okay, we've got a new James Bond. Why would Blofeld recognise this guy when in the last movie, You Only Live Twice, it was Donald Pleasence and Sean Connery. Now it's Telly Savalas and George Lazenby. So they didn't even use that. So that is the first example of the Bond universe right there.
It's fun. I got to say, it's funny you brought that up because I actually made that because Fiona hadn't seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And we're watching it, and the first thing she said was, well, what do you mean? He's just going in there wearing a kilt. Why doesn't Blofeld recognize him?
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like the Superman with the glasses. He puts on a pair of glasses, and nobody recognizes him, and that makes sense,
Yeah. But that, as I said, that's the first example of why they could do that. Plus, he was an emotional Bond, and Tracy. It's one of the few times, like again in Casino Royale, and you've got to remember this is, this happens in actors' first movies. You get a very strong leading lady. In Casino Royale with Eva Green, she was so powerful, and he sort of really was in her shadow. He looked up to her and obviously fell in love with her. Above all the Bonds, Tracy and Vesper are the two Bond women, the definitive Bond women. Okay, yes, he goes with Madeline Swan in the last ones, but if you think about women who are important, who are strong women, it's always these two. That Tracy, played by Diana Rigg, and Eva Green as Vesper. They're the two standouts. You've got Honey Child Rider, who is everyone's, most people's favourite Bond girl because she's in the first and she's so striking and memorable. But as far as Bond girls go, Her and Pussy Galore is another one. Very strong characters. And I think that's what makes them work. And I think especially in Majesty's Secret Service, because he was a fledgling actor, he was known as the only thing he'd done was the Big Fry over here. And the Big Fry was this, when he was a male model, there was an advert for Fry's chocolate cream, and he used to carry big crates of Fry's chocolate cream and smash them onto a quayside, and people used to eat chocolate. That's all he'd done. Yeah, so he was known, and people were saying, "Wow, the Big Fry is going to be James Bond." That's what he was known as. He was this hulking guy, good-looking guy who used to drop off chocolate, a bit like the milk tray man. And so that's all he was known for. So when he went into it, he went into a cold. But there's something about Lazenby's performance which is very sort of, what's the word for it? Sort of childlike, I think, inquisitive and stuff like that. I love the way he plays Bond in this film. And although he comes on and he's introduced very much in the Connery manner with the cigarette, and he can be quite aloof and what have you, there's a very human side to Lazenby's performance.
See, I think
Diana Rigg really works.
I think Diana Rigg is the one that carried the movie.
Well, this is what I'm saying, Mary. The very strong women. So Bond in this plays not second fiddle, because that's not right, but it kind of, Tracy as a character and as an actress is as strong as Bond in this film.
Yeah.
That's what makes it. And, you know, and not that it matters anymore with genders or anything these days, but this film was always seen as the one Bond film that women liked the best. Mm-hmm. Because it was a love story, like From Russia with Love, but there was more to it. And obviously the ending, which we'll get onto, was unheard of. No one could believe that was happening in a James Bond film.
Yeah, I was
All
upset.
that it was, you know, obviously when he gets to the Angels of Death and what have you, and Peace Gloria, but he tends to stick with Tracy all the way through. And you've got to remember, when can you remember a woman saving James Bond's life as many times as she does?
I know.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
She's crazy smart.
Yeah, you know, it's Diana Rigg, who's one of the greatest actresses we've ever had on the stage. So, you know, it's pretty good. And she was in the Avengers.
Yes.
So, you know, but we'll get on to that when we go through the cast. But it's really interesting that you thought that, Mary, as well. That's interesting.
Is it
and
me?
what if you want to think about it, Nick? Did she like it? Or?
Okay, one of her big comments was, and I thought this was interesting, the first half of the movie, she looked over at me and, you know, by the way, I'm going to cut, spoiler alert, for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. We're going to give everything away, most likely, for this film, but it is over 50 years old, folks. Go see it. Check it out. It's available for rent, I'm sure, if you don't already own it. Check it out. Okay, so one of her comments to me was that the first half of the movie was really more like a romance than a James Bond movie. Yeah. And she actually said, you probably wouldn't have watched this movie if it wasn't a James Bond movie.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and said, well, I can't say you're not correct. You know, I might not have watched this movie immediately if it weren't a James Bond movie. And, you know, it really, he was the most human Bond. And I think one of the other things that I noticed about it, watching it this time, thinking about what she said about, you know, Sean Connery was a panther, and Sean Connery looked like a man who killed people for a living in the James Bond movies. George Lazenby looked like a very cultured individual who could kill people if he needed to. And that's the difference, I think. You know, it was kind of, to me, and going back to what did Fiona think of the movie, she thought it was a good Bond film. You know, after it became a Bond film, as she said. At first it was a romance.
It's the montage, isn't it, where it comes in with we have all the time in the world, and you're thinking, you know, that's 45 minutes into the film, and you're thinking, this is a love story. She's absolutely right. And especially when you get a montage like that in the Bond film, set to, you know, one of the great love songs ever in movie history, you know, and it's quite beautifully done, and it's just a eulogy to this love affair between the two of them, you know. And I love the role of the father in that as well, where he's sort of looking down on it and everything. But it's obvious that Bond loves her. But the novel is even better. The novel is even better at describing that. And out of all the movies, the closest film to any Ian Fleming novel is On Her Majesty's Secret Service with From Russia with Love. They're the two that have followed the Fleming ethic. And, you know, obviously there's in Casino Royale there are certain scenes like the carpet beater scene and what have you, in certain lines. And it does adhere to the premise of the book. But as far as from page to screen, A Majesty's Secret Service is the closest to that, and From Russia with Love are the closest to any Fleming. Right, maybe we'll get on to the garlic scene, which is famous for later on, and the relationship between Lazenby and Rigg. But on the phone now, or on Skype now, is my good friend John Sadler. Hello, John.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us, John.
Oh, thanks for having me.
No, it's not a problem, mate, because we all know we have this huge shared love for A Majesty's Secret Service. So do you want to sort of give us a bit of background why you like it, and, you know...
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not just my favourite Bond film. It's probably my favourite film of all time, which is saying something. I was I'm going to talk too much. I was born in '68, so I was like 6 months old when the film kind of kicked off filming, and I guess then fast forward, my first Bond film probably in a cinema was For Your Eyes Only when I was about 13, and so I kind of. I came to On Her Majesty's Secret Service quite retrospectively. I remember seeing it on TV when I was probably like 10 or 11. And kind of like, you know, like at that age, I was probably busy playing with my cars at the same time. So I probably wasn't paying much attention. You know, I remember we kind of laughed about the he had lots of guts line, you know, and being doing all the romance stuff was kind of like, you know, we were far too young for all that stuff and probably kind of lost interest a bit. So, and I also remember everyone saying, oh, George Lazenby was crap, you know, he was a useless Bond. And that kind of stuff sticks in your head, you know, especially if you're being told that sort of thing by your best mate's eldest brother, and you kind of like trust what people tell you. So it's not until you're an adult yourself later on that you kind of make your own decisions about things.
And most of that, John, was second-hand news anyway, because people used to say, yeah, he was a terrible Bond, which is wrong. That it was it lost money, which was wrong. That it was, you know, the runt of the litter, that's wrong. I mean, as we know, Majesty's Secret Service is normally voted top of all the Bond lists, just short of, you know, Goldfinger from Russia with Love. So it's everything changed. And I think over the years, people who've grown up, as you said, have made up their own minds and realised just what an important thing. And the fact is, if you're a Bond fan, it goes back to the Fleming novels, and that's why this movie is so great, because it is a Fleming movie. It's a direct, you know, transition from page to screen, which is what we were touching on before. And it's interesting you said that went over your head with the romance, because I was just talking to Mary about that. And you're right, you know, and Nick said that he watched it, you know, with his wife, and that she said, if this wasn't a Bond film, this could be romance for the first 45 minutes, and that's right as well. So as kids, that kind of went above our heads. And then, obviously, you know, when he's got lots of guts, that's when it really started to kick in, and all the ski, you know, sequences and what have you. But you're absolutely right. And it's funny how we all gel on that sort of thing, that it's a very different Bond film. And do you still see it now as a very different Bond film, or do you see it as the Bond film that broke the mold, or that they're trying to... I mean, we're saying now that, obviously, in No Time to Die, we've touched on that, and obviously, you know, from being on the fence, I like it a little more after seeing it again. In fact, I like it a lot more after seeing it again, because you came up with the idea of it being in the Craig universe, which is something that I've tried to, as a Bond fan, I've tried to appreciate, and now I get.
Yeah,
so
because
when I went back,
you know,
when I went back
Casino Royale, he starts out with his first kill, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So it does kind of like, it wipes the slate clean, and it's a kind of confined universe that, you know, for the first time. Yeah. Although, obviously, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, he breaks the fourth wall when he says this never happened to the other fellow, and then you get him, going through his drawers, and he's got all this, you know, artifacts from his previous missions. So it kind of isn't another fellow. It is obviously supposed to be him.
It is Bond, but
it's not supposed to be a new,
because that's the way Lazenby got everyone onto his side. And that was ad-libbed, and I asked this directly, and he did ad-lib that line. It wasn't sort of written down. He actually said he wanted to say that. Yeah. And he looked directly at the fourth... Yeah, and it's the only time in Bond history, like Laurel and Hardy, where they break the fourth wall, they look directly at the camera. And that one was, and it got a great laugh. And it was as if to say, look, you know, hey, Connery was great, but, you know, give me a chance. Let's go on a good ride, which is exactly what he did. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it's interesting, because then obviously he goes through the drawers and everything, but to show again that it is a James Bond film, that, you know, the titles are interesting, because obviously they're showing all the past Connery movies as well. So it's an interesting thing that they do that beforehand. And obviously the one great faux pas that the Bond people did, which is the fact that, you know, when he goes through the drawers and he pulls out Honey's knife, that should never be there, because that was confiscated by Dr. No, so it can't be sticking to that.
Well spotted.
You know what I mean? But it's just the way you do it. There's little touches, and the fact that
your initial question.
The opening shot of the movie is the cigarette going to the mouth, exactly like it was in Dr. No.
That's right. But yeah, I do see it as an outlier. It's like a different film. But what's interesting is that No Time to Die has kind of brought it back, because they used, you know, some of the John Barry score from
they used a lot of it. They used a lot of it.
So they really brought it back, and also I think they brought that romance back. They wanted that heart. So, you know, I was so thrilled to see that as a fan of On Her Majesty's Secret Service when they had so many elements, I thought, in No Time to Die. And you know, I love No Time to Die because I see it purely within the universe of Craig, and I'm not like one of those Bond fans that gets really hung up on certain things that are the rules that you have to follow. I quite like breaking the rules and bending the rules. But going back, I do see On Her Majesty's Secret Service as a standout film. It's different. I feel differently about it, but obviously it was supposed to be, after Goldfinger originally, wasn't it? And then it got pushed back.
That's right, yeah, we're just talking about that Thunderball, yeah, because of everything that went on with Kenneth McClory, it was supposed to be, a Connery film, which would have been interesting, but I was saying to Nick and Mary, and we don't want to repeat it too much, but, it's better for having Lazenby with that sort of boyish charm and the new start, the new face. Plus,
he has that vulnerability, didn't he? In the scene where Diana Rigg skates up to him and he's kind of like trying to push his collar up to sort of hide his face. Yeah. I can't imagine Connery in a scene with that kind of vulnerability. He's a different Bond. So, even though I love George's performance in this film, and even though I would have liked to have seen him do more Bonds, at the same time I wouldn't have wanted Roger Moore not to come on the scene as well. So it's a difficult one, really.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine. I'm a big fan of Live and Let Die, and I'd hate to have not seen Roger Moore in that film.
No,
I can take or leave Man with the Golden Gun, but maybe George could have done Diamonds Are Forever. That would have been nice.
Well, actually, as we might as well touch on it now. The ending, when they were releasing the movie, they even before it was released knew that George probably wasn't going to be coming back. Although he'd signed a 7-picture deal, they knew that he probably wasn't coming back because of all the hassle that they'd had with him. He'd broken loads of rules on set. He'd gone off. He broke his arm virtually, skiing when he wasn't supposed to. They said, please don't come with your long hair and your beard. He did at the premiere. He did everything that he wasn't because he was given bad advice. In the time of, as we know, Easy Rider and everything, that, Bond has had his day and you really should be moving on. You don't want to be stuck with Bond, and that was the guy who did Radio Caroline gave him that, and so he listened to him really foolishly, and he said, now, he looks back on it and regrets it, but, had he stayed with Bond, the end of the film that we all see with the very emotional ending, that was the pre-credit sequence for Diamonds Are Forever. So that wouldn't have happened at the end, and the ending of the film was supposed to be that they drive off. Yeah, and then of course we have all the time in the world. And then
having said that about George, he was treated pretty badly, I think, on the production. I mean, the fact that Peter Hunt wouldn't speak to him directly and had to go through a mediator, I just think that's appalling. Well, I think he had a lot of hostility. He wasn't invited to the kind of party, was he? There was pictures of in the elevator saying, posted in the elevator saying there's going to be a kind of crew party, cast and crew, and he kind of thought that he was going to get a special invitation. And I think Clubley said you're only a star when, the people say you're a star. And I think he said, I'm the star, I should have been invited. And I got the feeling that he was probably wrong-footed and badly treated. So the fact that he kind of wore the beard maybe been a little bit of revenge on his part because of, the way he was treated through. I mean, imagine you've never acted before and the director won't even speak to you. I mean, imagine the stress you'd be under. I think it's appalling.
Yeah, also, it's interesting, John. I don't think he helped himself either. And it really depends on what book you read. Plus, I don't want to say too much because I've actually got in contact with George Lazenby's manager the other day, and he's going to listen to this. So we better be on good films. But I have to say, we can actually say this because he'll probably agree in the fact that, yes, he was given bad advice by people who he should listen to, but he didn't help himself because, if you read all the books that are on this, he was acting very much the star. And it really riled up Harry Saltzman and Albert Broccoli. They weren't happy with the way he was going on. And I think had he had someone around him who could actually say, George, let's just join in. He sat a lot with the stuntmen and everything because he was one of the boys. He'd grown up on the Australian, back, in the open. He was very much a guy who was, hands-on, wanted to do things, was willing to please. However, he was now playing Bond, and what you say about the beard and everything, yeah, I totally agree with that. And as I've said, in the area of Easy Rider and everything like this, he was rebelling, but
he looked great with that beard.
Remember that he had his hair cut. He went to Connery's hairdresser and tailor. He got one of Connery's suits. He cut his hair, Broccoli, wanting to be James Bond and getting the part. So he tailored himself to be James Bond, and then once he got it, he was treated like a star, but it was probably too much too soon. Because if you go from being someone who's been in the Australian outback no more than sort of 7 or 8 years beforehand to now being the greatest secret agent in movie history and treated with everything as Dom Perignon, caviar and everything, it's going to be a huge shock to the system.
Yeah.
And I think
massively,
had he had someone
massively.
there to mediate
fish out of water, it's extraordinary.
It would have been better. And I think that's what Diana Rigg kind of did, both on and off screen. And she always downplayed the fact, but let's go on to this, what we were talking about before, Mary, about the fact that you didn't think they had a chemistry.
No.
I sort of kind of see what you're saying, but it was built up by the papers, and the newspapers especially over here really can be quite ruthless. And there was this scene where they were having a press conference, and she said, "George, I'm having garlic for lunch, I hope you are." Now, meaning the fact that she is having garlic, so she doesn't want him to get garlic breathed out. So hoping that he's having it too. Of course, in the press, it came out as Diana Rigg eats garlic because she hates George Lazenby. Yeah? That's the way it's positioned. And that's where all of this started. And, and people tend to look for this. But, Diana Rigg, yeah, she said he did a couple of really daft things, and, yeah, sort of kind of ostracized him and would go very much off on the huff and wouldn't go to his own party, even though it was held for him as James Bond. But, only George can answer that. In fact, John, we've been there when George has discussed it, haven't we? I mean, we've sat there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think he was, he was under the same impression that he was just given the wrong advice at the wrong time. And there were things he would change. But he was listening to people, and he, believed these rumours that were going around that Diana Rigg really disliked him, which wasn't so much the case. And my mum met Diana Rigg once, and she said she was very, quite an imposing figure and very, not snooty, but, very, wow, she's Diana Rigg. And she was, you know who I am type of thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people think she's lovely, but I think she has that, real aura about her that she's a woman in power, yeah.
She has a presence.
Yeah. She has a presence, and obviously incredibly well educated, and everything else, whereas George, people perceive George not to be as clever as he is. He really is a bright, intelligent guy, and I think that, it was the posh English, lady against the rugged Australian guy from the outback, and I think that was kind of played out and used against them and kind of led to this thing now. I mean, the Majesty Secret Service is still, as we touched on, always seen, it was a failure. Even Connery said that when he was interviewed with Damsel Forever, I'm replacing the guy because the other one wasn't a hit. Nonsense. It was the second biggest movie of the year. It made over 10 times back its initial cost. It did incredibly well. And lots of people love it. And to this day, people like Christopher Nolan and stuff say it's easily the best of any of the James Bond films. It's a wonderful film.
I read somewhere where the director purposely did that to Lazenby because they wanted him to be kind of cold and standoffish.
Yeah.
They wanted him to be in that character, so the director ignored him so that he would be that cold, standoffish character.
Well, they got that because basically, George Lazenby had gone in there, and as the documentary, I was just saying, John, that you were the guy who set me up with Stephen Riley when we did Everything and Often for the documentary, which I'll always be grateful to you for. And when he was saying, right, who do we need to interview? And I remember sitting with Matt Field, and I said, look, Lazenby is brilliant. He is a wonderful person to interview, but just make sure that you're going to get a 15 certificate because it'll go back to sex at any time, which is what it's done. And every time we've sat, John, and listened to George, there's always a, he's one of the lads. He likes to have a joke and a laugh. And when it came to Peter Hunt, he was there, and the story was that George Lazenby went to the offices, and then when the secretaries Backington ran up the stairs and sort of said, I heard you looking for the next James Bond. And he could carry that off because he had that boyish charm. But, as we said, Peter Hunt was so impressed that he basically said, well, what movies have you been in? Because I wanted a good actor. And he gave out all these false movies that had been made in Israel or what have you, which weren't true, which were completely made up. And they fell for it and they said, well, we don't need to look those up because we've never heard of them. But obviously, the guy's got talent. We'll think about it. And then when
they didn't have IMDb in those days,
he said, you've just fooled the two most ruthless people in producing history. You can act. You're going to be great as James Bond. But after that, John's right. He did seem to sort of stand back a bit. And I don't know if that was because he wanted Lazenby to try and be a bit more petulant or what, bring that to his character. I mean, the only thing was that the one thing that I've never understood is that at the end, which we'll touch on, but we might as well talk on it now, he said, Hunt stopped the take, and Lazenby thought he'd done the best take ever because he'd read the end chapter of the book, got into the character, acted it out, and he said it was the best thing he'd ever done, and he was crying. And Peter Hunt said, "No, let's do another take." And he said, "But wasn't that perfect, Peter?" He said, "No, James Bond doesn't cry."
That's right.
Yeah.
And Peter Hunt also said to him that, about the acting thing, is that you fooled two of the most ruthless guys in the business, so you obviously can act,
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, that's, if you can do that. And, let's be honest, I think Lazenby carries it off great. But you're right, we're talking about universes, and this is very much a standalone film in the Bond franchise, because, as we said, Blofeld doesn't recognise them from Live Twice. You could only do it with a new face and with this story, because this is the most compact, story within a story that there is in any of the Bond books. It's quite wonderful. It has a beginning and a very succinct end, very much like, No Time to Die. And I think in years to come, if they're ever going to do a double bill of Bond films, it will be Her Majesty's Secret Service and No Time to Die, which will be the perfect human Bond movies to watch. Do you not think, John, those two films?
Yeah, absolutely. But there's an awful lot of people out there who are what you'd maybe call casual Bond films, or film fans who don't call themselves Bond fans as such, that still listen to the old Lazenby was crap. It was.
Yeah, very much so.
There's still a whole load of people. I go on Twitter and I do sometimes do these sort of. They do what was the best Bond scene, and I'm doing one at the moment actually. It's quite interesting, and they just was a tie. There was a toss-up between Escape from Piz Gloria or Have I Shot My Last Bullet from Connery and Dr. No. And I was quite saddened to see the Escape from Piz Gloria losing out, because I just think that ultimately the majority of people out there still have sort of kind of a bad vibe about On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and I think that there was one chap I was having a bit of debate about it, and he was saying he was really he didn't like the dubbing, the fact that that George was dubbed, for this Hilary Bray character, and I don't really notice that anymore now when I watch the film. But I guess at the first watch, it might be a bit jarring seeing a Bond actor being dubbed, and I think that's quite a big thing for some people. It puts them off.
As we know, John,
and also some of the editing of the fight sequences at the beginning.
When we met George last time, he was really unhappy about that, because he hasn't been told that he was going to get dubbed. Yeah,
I'd like to see
George
the
Baker,
version.
who played Sir Hilary Bray, who came back as Captain Benson, if you remember, in Spy Who Loved Me. He dubbed him, but I don't think it jars at all. I think and after a while you just forget about it, And I think
it's very well dubbed. Actually, it's very well done.
It was well done, because I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, it's done by George Baker.
George Baker is doing all the lines as Sir Hilary.
Oh,
yeah. Well, isn't it the fact that there's more George Baker dialogue than George Lazenby dialogue? I think there might be.
Quite possibly,
I think there may be more George Baker, which is interesting. But he carried it off really well. I mean, probably helped by the fact that George Baker was Peter Hunt, the director's neighbour.
Interesting. Good bit of trivia there. But one of the other reasons I really love the film, going back to the beginning, I guess, is that I love the fact that it's a Christmas film. People are always banging on about Die Hard being this amazing Christmas film, blah, 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 blah. But I think, On Her Majesty's Service is a much bigger Christmas film as an action movie. And also The Long Kiss Goodnight is another really good Christmas action film, which people don't tend to talk about, but that's for a different podcast.
It is, but okay, I got to pause you. I love that film, by the way, but carry on. I think
it's
I'm
a great
the
film. Yeah. I've just been listening to Brian Cox's autobiography, and he talks about it a bit in that, which is really great to hear. But I love the fact that On Her Majesty's Secret Service is set at Christmas. He's got a Christmas song, which is now on my kind of perennial Spotify Christmas song playlist. I love that. Kind of the jingle bells of sleigh bells. The Christmas atmosphere, and I also love I love late 60s period. So I love the kind of the decor, like the purple flock wallpaper. In the hotel and all that stuff. And the slightly large bow ties, and it's just it's a really cool era. And I think that George, he obviously had an incredible body for suits. I think out of all the Bond actors, maybe with the exception of Sean, he wore the suit the best, and he just looked amazing in those suits. And that to me, the stylistic aspect of it, obviously the incredible soundtrack, probably one of the best, and the whole atmosphere around Christmas, and those incredible locations like Murin, Piz Gloria, places I can't believe we've not visited yet, Mark. But
I have been there. Do you want me to get into my story about that? How I got there?
I want to go there.
We were going to go together, weren't we? But I don't think it wasn't to be on the 50th anniversary. But
we definitely tried to go there. Yeah. But I've been there once before because it was a truly amazing experience. There was these DVDs out called Pretty Fly DVDs, and they would be on different things like Pretty Fly to ski, Pretty Fly to rollerblade, what have you. And one of them was going to be skiing, and so I thought, oh, this sounds good. And I knew the guy there, and he said, well, why don't you come out if you can get the backing from Carlton TV, which is where I worked? Why don't you come out as photographer? I thought, great. So I went and I said, where's it going to be? And he went, Muren. And I went, what, near Mount Shilhorn? And he said, yeah. And I went, oh my word, count me in. There's no way I'm not going to this because obviously it's Majesty Secret Service. So I told Emma, I was beyond excited. We got the deal done, and I've never fought as much for a deal in all of my working life to get this deal sorted out. We got the money. I gave it to him, and I said, right, I'm going to be a photographer. We went out there with all of these amazing snowboarders. They were the greatest snowboarders in the world. They were from all over the world. They were from Austria, America. They were from Australia, everywhere. And we all met in Muren. We stayed in the hotel, which directly looked out onto the mountain. It was just incredible, right?
Amazing.
Any expenses paid for. And so, I'm really going to cut this down. But anyway, these guys were amazing. One of the guys, John, you will know, Ski Sunday, Ed Lee?
Yeah.
The guy who's commentates on it, he does all of the Olympic stuff. Well, he was our best guy out there, so we got really friendly with Ed Lee. So we now, we keep in touch with him via, stuff like this. Emma did a design for one of his kids. So, Ed Lee, who's now a commentator, before that he was an amazing snowboarder. And I used to go out there, we were taken up on chairlifts to the top of mountains, and my job was to stand there taking pictures of them doing these amazing stunts into the early morning rising sun. It was within a snowfield. It was truly, truly brilliant.
Wow.
Apart from 2 times. One time I went up there, and I wasn't the most, amazing skier. The only time I'd ever really skied was when in fact, we'll get onto this now. It's the only. I might as well. I'm going to work, John. You'll know this happens. I'm going to tell 2 stories at once. I was going to get onto it when we did the Bond girls, because Anushka Hempel was one of the Bond girls, who was the Australian girl. But we'll get onto it now. So when I worked in Australia, when I lived out there, I worked for Anushka Hempel. So it's the only time in my life I've actually worked for a Bond girl. She ran a magazine called Absolutely Gorgeous Things, and it was like a sort of a magazine which did very high-end furniture. And my job was in there. I came in as manager to try and, do a few things in it. I said, has anyone ever contacted the Grace Brothers, which is a running joke over here because that is Are You Being Served, which is an old comedy thing. And I couldn't believe that a real company was called Grace Brothers. And the guy who ran this company said, there's no point because, they're the Grace Brothers. I said, well, has anyone ever phoned these people and contacted them saying what we do? No. And I said, well, they've got an antique department. Surely we can do something. And he said, yeah, you do it, mate. You waste your time. So I phoned them up. I went in to see them. I said, why don't we do this? You've got all these amazing pieces of furniture in this store on the top floor. We'll do a magazine insert within the magazine, yeah, and it will open up and there'll be your own little magazine within the magazine. They gave me enough money to go back. They couldn't believe it. This is my first week of starting for this company over in Australia. I got enough money that when I got my bonus off the back of that, I handed my notice in a month later, and I toured Australia with my then girlfriend. We bought a car, and we drove from Sydney all the way up to the Barrier Reef and what have you, all the way up through, all these amazing places. We were lying on the Barrier Reef one day in about 120 degrees, and she turned around and she says, I've always wanted to go skiing. And because I had all this money, from this money that I'd made off this one deal, I said, right, let's get into... We found out where the plane was flying out, and we flew out later that day. We flew to the snowy mountains from the Barrier Reef, went skiing for 2 days and flew back. That was me trying to be James Bond in real life. And it was all paid for by one of the Bond girls. So that was pretty cool. But that was one of my best jobs I ever had. And I used to drive all these places and get all these people to give us money for the magazine because they couldn't believe I'd gone to the effort to drive out. But really what I was doing is I was driving my then girlfriend to all these amazing places in the car, drop her off, and then I'd go and see these people, get the business, and it was incredible. And one of the most amazing ones I ever went to was this farm in the middle of nowhere, and it used to be where, when one of the Apollo missions went wrong, and the only place it could be tracked was in this little tiny satellite place in Australia. And I went to the farm. I didn't even know it was there. And she goes, you should go and see it. It's very famous. And I went in there, and I had my sandwiches, my lunch, sitting in one of the satellite dishes that saved the Apollo mission. Quite mad. But I had a wonderful time over there. So, yeah, so that was me getting paid, to travel around and do all of that by one of the Bond girls. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, going back to when we went to Murin, so we were with all these guys, and they were just amazing. And we did this photo shoot one morning. And I was standing on the top of the mountain, and they said, yeah, you can just ski back, yeah? And I hadn't got any skis. I didn't know what I was doing. And I just went, well, and they said, right, see you later. And they all turned round and skied off down the mountain. And I am literally, if any kids clever there is, I'm literally shitting myself because I'm stuck on the top. The snow was coming in. It was 6:30 in the morning or what have you, and I was like, how am I going to get out of here? I went down, and I had all of my camera equipment, and I took one step, and I went down at least 5 foot, and the snow was up to my chest. Wow. And I thought, I'm going to die up here. The air was really thin. I couldn't get my breath properly, and I thought, right, Mark, you've got to think of this. So I edged up all of my camera stuff, and I was using my camera bag as a way to try and crawl my way up, and I spent an hour and a half going no more than, 300 feet, because the snow was so thick and I'd stepped off on the wrong bit. I finally found a bit of hard rock, crawled up there, got to the chairlift, on the chairlift back down, but I was literally terrified. I thought that was the end of it. The next day, they said, I can't believe you've come on one of these and you can't even ski. I said, well, I've never really tried bar one day in the snowy mountains. And I said, that was covered in grass, and I could do it, but, it wasn't great. So anyway, so they said, well, don't do that again, just make sure you're on these slopes and what have you, and they gave me a place to stick to, which I did. So 2 nights later, they said, right, we're going up, we're going to have a special treat. And we went up, John, to one of the places which looked directly on to where we were, and it was in a mountain. We went up on these huge sort of tracks, they were like farm tractors, but they had a tank sort of rails on them, and they went through the snow, and they took us up to this place. And we got out, and we were at the very top of this mountain, and it was just like something out of a Bond film. So it was this sort of huge sort of ski lodge, and it had this roaring fire and everything there. The Christmas trees were still up because it was just after Christmas. So it was just, I literally thought I was Bond on a Majesty Secret Service at this point. I was so excited and such a juvenile, as you know I am and still are. And I just thought, this is so great. And we went there and we had all that fondue. It was a fondue that they call it, where you dip it in the cheese, where you heat it up.
Fondue, yeah.
Cheese. Yeah. So we had all of that. We drank copious amounts of drink. And one of them being schnapps. They had all this different flavoured schnapps. And you would have peach-flavoured schnapps. You would have, cranberry-flavoured schnapps. We just ploughed our way through them. So Emma and I were absolutely zonked. Literally, we'd been drinking. It was a high altitude, so the air's thinner, and it does go to your head a bit quicker. So everyone went, right, see you, and they all went off. And we're stuck up there again. And I thought, well, this can't happen again. Some people were on sledges, right? Emma and I were so drunk. I promise you this is true. I can bring it and back up this story, because to this day we can't believe we did it, but it happened. Emma and I said to Emma, it's this way. We got on there. She's sitting in front of me on this quite small sled, which wasn't huge, not even one that you pull your kids around on. I went off, and we ended up going down the Olympic ski run on a sledge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, which is hard and snow. And we were going, I'd hate to think how fast we were going, but we were so drunk we just went with it. Woo! Going down.
Well,
right? And
that's when you have the most fun, and you can get away with the most because you're loose and you don't realize how dangerous it is.
It's how dangerous it is. Looking back on it now, it's hard to believe we did this, but this is what we did. We ended up 1.5 miles away from the hotel. Oh. Right, because we'd skied so far. We left the sledge there and then tried to work our way back through all these fields and got back at about 2 a.m. And everyone said, where the hell have you been? And we said, we've been on the Olympic ski run. On a sledge. Oh, happy days.
And I forgot to say when we visited on a Majesty Secret Service, as an adult, it's quite an important moment in my life. So I went to a New Year's Eve ball in 1995, and I met this woman who became my wife. And then the day after, it was a black tie ball, very James Bond. And the day after, I was like hungover, and I kind of on a Majesty Secret Service was on the TV about 2:00 in the afternoon. So I lay on the sofa and put a blanket over myself, and I watched it, and I just completely transfixed. And that was when it kind of came to me that how amazing this film was. We've just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, so been together ever since. So it's quite a sort of moment of significance for me as a sort of rediscovery.
Yeah, well, it's so that backs it up as being the most romantic of all the Bond films, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it hit me at a good moment.
Yeah, but before that, John, was it your favourite Bond growing up, or was it just at that moment that it really hit you that this not only is my favourite Bond film, but one of my favourite films, or my favourite film of all time? No,
it hit me then because I hadn't really revisited it at all. Before then. I think I'd only seen it once when I was a kid, so it was literally something I eschewed completely. From that point, I've probably seen it about a dozen times since, including in the cinema.
Well, we went to see it, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think I've seen it twice in the cinema now. But I can watch it. I can watch it, at least once a year, and I never get bored of it,
No, it was lovely to see it on the big screen, especially with George giving the introduction and what have you. He's quite the bon voyant, and he can tell some great stories, especially down a rig where he was saying things about her, wasn't he? And then saying, "Do you think she'll listen to this?" and all this kind of. It was really great, but the stories were great. But because of the stuff with all the Bond stars and everything, I've been incredibly lucky to meet him on several occasions, and he's always never ever let you down when it comes to stories and what have you. And we went, one of the ones we went to was Richard Keel's birthday party, and Cinema Retro had set this big thing up in a hotel outside of London, outside Waterloo. It was a very nice hotel, and I may have touched on this before in a podcast way in the past, but Richard Keel was there, and he was so tall, and by this time he couldn't really walk properly, so he had this electric scooter, and there was myself, Dave Worrell, who looks after the magazine, Lee Pfeiffer. We were all there, and we were supposed to be looking after Richard Keel and taking him up to his own birthday party. We hit the wrong button in the lift and ended up in the bowels of this hotel, literally, which was just for staff. And it looked like that scene in Moonraker where they've hollowed out the mine, John, where they go in where the shuttle is. It was like that, and we were walking around all these things, and Richard Keel and his little electric thing, worried that he was going to run out of electricity, and we were like bricking it. We didn't know where we were. We ended up going into a service lift. We went up in the service lift because the guy said, "What are you guys doing down here?" And then looked at Richard Keel and did a double take, like the pigeon in Moonraker, and we're just thinking, what the and it just took us up. We ended up at Richard Keel. He was late for his own birthday party, which was all our fault because we'd gone down at the basement of this hotel. People were wondering where the hell he was. And we were sitting there, and then who should walk in but George Lazenby? And it was myself and Matt who we did the documentary with, and the Everything or Nothing one with the consultants and all that. And we were sitting there, and George Lazenby looked around, and he said, "Right, I'm going to sit with you guys because you look the least nerdy." and I looked at him, and I just felt like saying, I turned around to Matt and said, "Should we tell him the truth? Because we're probably two of the biggest nerds here, mate, to be honest." But yeah, it was so funny.
You're probably still thinking of the Grace Brothers when you hit the wrong button in the elevator.
Well, this is the thing, talking about
going down.
Yeah, links in perfectly. So thanks for rounding those stories up there, John, with a lovely little bit of universe. You're very good at doing that. And back to me. But no, he was just wonderful. But that party, obviously, he told a story which we both loved, which was when they did the scene where he goes up with the angels and stuff like this, and he goes into Peace Gloria. The girl there, Ruby Bartlett, played by the wonderful Angela Scory, which we'll go into in a minute. They thought on the first day that to get everyone in a good mood, and George tells the story so brilliantly. To get everyone in a good mood, what they thought they'd do is they'd strap a German sausage onto the inside of George Lazenby's leg. So when she goes down and goes to write the room number on the inside of his thigh, she reaches in there and all she can feel is this warm, quite long appendage. And George was waiting there for this to happen. So she reached down, touched the sausage and went up it, tapping it, and then didn't say a thing. And George was just looking at it, and as if it didn't impress her. And all you've got to think about was that she was married to Leslie Phillips, from the Doctor movies. Hello, in real life. So that says more about Leslie Phillips than anybody, I think.
you wouldn't be able to do that these days.
You certainly wouldn't. Imagine that. Sausage gate.
Dear.
But I love the fact that he, and when it was, again, through another cinema retro thing, we had it at the cinema, which was an amazing place right next to the Millennium Eye, and it was this huge place which had a cinema museum, which had loads of stuff in it, all the Star Wars stuff and what have you, all the original props and models, and it was to celebrate Ray Harryhausen's birthday, and it was also, I think it was Roger Moore's, but no, Christopher Lee's it was Christopher Lee's, but Christopher Lee wasn't very well, so Roger Moore, imagine this, Roger Moore replaced Christopher Lee that day. What a great, stand-in. And he came in, and one of the talks there was by George, because it was a Bond thing there specifically for people, and people bought tickets, and you could listen to, Christopher Lee was going to talk about being Scaramanga, but obviously one of the ones was George Lazenby talking about his time as James Bond. And my abiding memory was where the fact that, he came straight out with the story, as he did in that documentary, where he said, so the producers, his opening gambit was, well, the producers thought I was gay, so they sent these, because I'd been a male model and they were a bit frightened about my sexuality, so they sent a couple of models up there, and I showed them and him, that, I was a man, and all this kind of thing, and you can see these blokes sitting with their kids, looking at their kids, thinking, right, what do we do here? This is going, and then George carried on. And he said, and then he said, so they gave me some horses, and I made the horses sweat. I ran them around the paddock. They were naked, far more than I was. I said I could do the underwater breather without even that little thing that Connery had. I was the man. But he said, and then the models came in, and we had to do our throws and everything. I did a lot of action on those mats, I'll tell you. And by this time, the blokes had got their hands over their kids' ears and were escorting them out the room.
Wow.
It was just brilliant. And as I said, with George, things tend to come back to sex. And I don't know if that's an Australian thing or what have you, but, it's hilarious. And I love it. And when he did the documentary and he came on, his section is so wonderful. But it is so full of pathos as well. That bit where he said he'd done all this thing about growing his beard, and he went to a party in Beverly Hills. And he was sitting there, and Roman Polanski was there. And Roman Polanski said, oh, this is George. He's the redundant actor, right? And he said, I was upset. And then I went home and read up what redundant meant. Typical George. And he's just so human. And I think that's what makes him a really perfect choice for this film, because as I said, and I've said it several times, it is the most humane of all the Bond films, bar the new one. And while we're on, John, so you rate, you think it's as good as Casino Royale?
Well, the David Niven one?
No, the great one. You think it's good an entry in his, not the David Niven one? Blimey, no.
Yeah, I mean, I love Casino Royale. It's a really great film from start to finish. But for me, I have a sentimental attachment, I think, to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and it took me a while to get used to Daniel Craig's Bond, but I think, I've just rewatched Spectre, which I actually enjoyed more the second time.
Oh, I love Spectre. It's one of those, the thing that gets me is when you're on Instagram, when No Time to Die came out, it was like McCarthyism. I think a lot of people were too frightened to say anything because they knew that Eon and the Bond people and Universal, whoever it is, read Instagram. They gauge more now. It's not like back in the day where you had hard copy magazines and people would write a review. Everyone's a reviewer now, so they would go on and they'd read what people were having to say. And it amazed me, some of the people that were then invited by all these people were the people who eulogized about the movie so much, and that kind of saddened me because you needed a bit more of an overview there. And I think, John, you mentioned that Graham Rye didn't like it. The guy set up the 007 magazine, and I totally agreed with him at that point. But there was all these people saying what a great movie it was, and it was as though people were too frightened to actually say it's so flawed. But, then you get people saying that Spectre's rubbish. I think Spectre's a wonderful little movie from the Orson Welles opening, the one-take opening and everything. I really love Spectre. Yes, it's a little long, and as you pointed out, you didn't think Christoph Waltz was the best Blofeld, did you? I mean, you weren't a fan of his work in that. And I
always feel that he plays the same character in all the films he's in. Still the guy in Inglourious Bastards. It's the same act, you know. And I also don't like the fact that he's kind of rude to journalists in interviews. I find him. I don't like rudeness, so it kind of puts me off him as an actor a bit. He just seems a bit self-satisfied. So that definitely put me off. I felt that he was a bit weak. But then there's this whole thing about Rami Malek, isn't there? And this whole thing about weak villains, and it is hard. The villain thing is it's hard to break away from stereotypes, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the Bond villains obviously have facial scarring of some description. And, you know, the whole thing needs to sort of be kind of rethought. But
yeah, did you like Rami Malek did you like Rami Malek in the movie, John?
No, I didn't really think he was.
No, I thought he was the weakest thing. Bar the actual opening titles, I thought he was the weakest thing in the thing. I thought he was really poor.
It's a shame,
and you're right.
It's just like
Blofeld's greatest hits.
Really good.
Like,
yeah, I think I'm just kicking in on this. You hit it solid, Mark, with the fact that Rami Malek was really good when you couldn't see it was Rami Malek.
Yeah, the opening bit was fantastic.
At the beginning when he had the mask on, that was a villain. And, it was a villain, but with a human side to him, obviously, because of what happens there. But I think later on in it, it was more like he was just there as a plot device. He didn't feel like a real
voice
villain.
And everything. It started off like a Hammer horror film. The opening of No Time to Die opened like a Hammer film. I thought it was really generally spooky, beautifully done. Having all the bits where you thought, hang on, she's looking at that, so this must be set 15 years ago or something. It was beautifully done.
Is it also the first time Bond doesn't appear in the opening title sequence?
Say that again, sorry, John?
Isn't it also the first time that James Bond doesn't appear in the open sequence?
Oh my God, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Thinking about it.
Yes, it is.
It breaks that rule as well.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So, and it was, I thought it was brilliantly done. I really loved the opening. So, but then he got really affected, and I just thought, where's he going with this? This is just awful. It's as though he's a camp version of a villain. And I just thought, it's a bit like Dr. Evil. I thought he was more Dr. Evil than anything else, and I just thought, this is not working at all.
It's a shame because so many other aspects of that film work brilliantly. You think that, it's a shame they didn't tighten that up. I'm not sure how much impact Phoebe Waller-Bridge ultimately had or not. I don't think anyone's ever really kind of discovered that.
I don't think she had that much, John. I think there was a few lines. I mean, the joke about M being the desk being bigger than M, and he said, "No, you're the same size." That's very much Waller-Bridge. I thought that it could well be Purvis. Who knows? But I didn't think it had that much of an impact. But there are certain ones. I thought the guy who played the American agent, he was very good. And I loved the girl who was obviously in Blade Runner. I thought she was great, and I'd like to have seen her because her character was more rounded than anybody's. The fact that you thought she was inconsequential, a bit drunk and a bit nervous, and ended up being this super agent. I loved all that.
Paloma.
Paloma. That was Ana de Armas.
She's such and she was obviously in Knives Out, and she's incredible, isn't she? I mean, I absolutely. If there was ever going to be a James Bond spin-off character, if it was her, I would go and see that movie.
Yes.
She's outstanding. Yeah. She's absolutely beautiful as well.
She's stunning. But that was a really lovely character. And there was talk that Jinx out of Die Another Day was going to have its own franchise. If there's going to be a franchise, it should be her, Ana de Armas. You're right.
Definitely, Ana de Armas. Yeah, she's amazing.
Really,
and I loved how she looked in that film. She reminds me a bit of the Ringo Starr's wife, Barbara Bach, in Spy Love Me. She had that similar kind of dress on. Real classic Bond girl stuff. She looked incredible.
But she was still able to kick butt, even wearing that dress.
Incredible, I love that sequence. It's one of my favorites. It's just
absolutely. Yeah.
So when all the big, powerful Hollywood muckety-mucks are listening to this podcast, make sure that you remember Ana de Armas, should have her own movie series. So
yes, she definitely should.
She
was wonderful in Blade Runner, but she was even better in this. She was really, really good. Really good.
Mm.
And I think she's more powerful, as I said, and one of the most beautiful women to grace a Bond film, I think. I think she's great, really, really wonderful.
Well, and I'll say this because I'm kind of like you, Mark. Initially, I wasn't sure how I felt about No Time to Die, but going back and looking at it, I really like it more and more every time I think about it, see it,
Yeah.
But we talked about the fact that the villains were kind of weak in it, but at the same time, the movie was good enough and the story was strong enough that the characters of the villains didn't have to be that strong to make it work. So I think that says a lot to it, because a bad villain can really ruin a movie. And I don't think it did. It was distracting, but it didn't ruin this by any shot.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Tomorrow Never Dies with Jonathan Pryce's villain, who was probably the weakest of any Bond movie, and that really should have sunk that movie. I've got a real soft spot for Tomorrow Never Dies, but he was so bad in that, that you think to yourself, well, the movie carried it, so it can't be the disaster everyone thinks it is.
It's one of my least favourite Bond films, Tomorrow Never Dies, and one of the reasons for that is that the sun doesn't shine in that film. I think that even when they kind of go into the sea with Michelle Yeoh, I'm not sure of the exact location, but he's cloudy then as well. It's just such a great
That's in
film.
James Bond Island out of Man with the Golden Gun. That's the same place. They went back there.
And it's all cloudy. They didn't even get a blue sky scene. It's just, you've got to have a bit of sunshine in Bond. It's got to be the locations have to look glamorous, I think. And
which they did in No Time to Die. I thought the locations in this film were stupendous. I thought they were absolutely, especially the opening bit.
The cinematography
burning of the wishes
was outstanding as well. No Time to Die.
Cinematography. The bit where it turned round, where the guys were walking down the outside of the building, and it went from that amazing opening to them walking down the outside of the shard type building. That was really, really well done. Beautifully directed.
It looked beautiful throughout. It just looked incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that Craig has benefited from all the Bond films, and the fact that his cinematographers, like in Skyfall, where they've got that amazing scene with the fight with all the projected stuff and everything, and the bit where he goes into the Monaco gambling house and everything, he's benefited hugely from the people who they've had working on those films. And he said that himself, that he's been blessed by some of the great cinematographers and everything. The lighting guys, they've all been top notch. But
think about it, it's a really consistent series with Craig, because I even like quite a lot of scenes in Quantum of Solace. It kind of derails, but the Tosca scene, and that's one of my favourite scenes.
That's a great scene in the film. That's the one thing I'd say. I think that's easily the worst James Bond film by a country mile. The guys knows. I think that. But the Tosca scene was actually given to I believe it's Michael G. Wilson's son to look after, and it's interesting the fact that he oversaw that scene, and it was easily the best part of the film. And I just think the direction, everything was wrong. I thought it was just a dog's end of a film. The way they treated Felix Leiter in that, the whole thing was rubbish. I just didn't like it at all. But there you go. Everybody, everyone has the Man with the Golden Gun or the Quantum of Solace.
Yeah, there's a few scenes in Quantum. I think the car chase at the beginning is good. The close sequence, the Bourne Identity kind of fight in that building at the beginning, the motorcycle. Chase, and then the Tosca scene and the homage to Goldfinger with Strawberry Fields. Up until I like all those things, and then I don't like any of the rest of the film. But some of those scenes are great.
Yeah, but they add up to about 20 minutes. It's not good.
Yeah.
Well, any film that's based around water rights as your big thing, it's tough to sell. So.
But we've talked about Craig so much, and I think he was a good Bond, and let's get back to the Majesty Secret Service. But it's interesting. All I wanted to do was get your feedback from it, because as I said, it was the one that really, really I couldn't quite get my head around. When I first saw it, I just thought, wow, I disliked that an awful lot. And then when I saw it again, I appreciated far more for the good movie it is. And it's interesting. So at New Year, we're having everyone wants to have a James Bond party, so I'm going to be setting the projector up, and we're all going to be dressing up and coming around having vodka martinis and watching Bond before the celebrations at the night time, which I think is going to be quite nice, because the kids, Mauve and Xanthi, still haven't seen it. I'm not sure it's Xanthi's cupcake, she's only 11, but I think Mauve would quite like it, but we'll see. But I think I'm looking forward to seeing it again, put it that way. And John and I were really desperate to see it together at the cinema, but everything that's been going on is sort of although we are trying to meet up for champagne in the Burlington Arcade, which is done up as a tribute to James Bond for 60 years of James Bond, and the whole of the arcade, which is the most beautiful arcade in London, is the Gun Barrel, and they've got all the Swarovski diamonds and everything all over the place, and then they've got the Bollinger have set up a special James Bond, 60 years of James Bond list. So John and I are going to try and meet there on Friday, I think, aren't we, John?
Yeah. And COVID's a bit like one of these Blofeld sort of schemes, isn't it? Sort of to sort of toxicate us all.
The Angels of Death, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of full circle.
It's awful, really. And in a way, that's sort of the story of Majesty Service. It kind of mirrors what's going on now in a strange kind of way. It's all very odd. So should we go back to the film, guys, and talk about let's go on to sort of Pete, the director, and then George and Diana, and then some of the Bond girls, and then get into the movie?
Yeah,
Sure.
I think that's a good idea, and this is, and I will say that I think talking about these other Bond films and stuff, and you touched on this when we were talking a little bit earlier, John, the way that they shot on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the film looked different from other Bond films in a lot of ways. The way they did the fight scenes, the way they used the camera work in it, it didn't feel like a Bond film necessarily, but it worked. And I feel like when they went for the different actor, they really tried for a different feel with the film overall. And I don't know, I feel like they kind of said, okay, well, I feel like they took everything that they accomplished with her on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and then they kind of turned the clock back when they went on, Diamonds Are Forever. And I don't know, what are your thoughts about that?
I think there was a perception that On Her Majesty's Secret Service hadn't worked, and so it kind of got all the good stuff kind of got thrown out immediately. And obviously Peter Hunt didn't then direct another film, which was a shame, because I thought he made a really cohesive film. It feels like a proper movie. It doesn't feel like a Bond movie. Sometimes they can feel a little bit formulaic, like this scene then goes into this scene and then that scene, and then you have the building blows up at the end. It just didn't, even though it had a lot of those elements, it didn't feel like those were bolted on like a storyboard. It felt like it had a real flow to it. It had like quiet moments and peaks and troughs and excitement, and the music is just, I think it is also, I think you get moments in decades where you get a certain sort of aesthetic focus. And I think the late 60s, if you hit like the Ennio Morricone soundtracks at the time, there is a kind of, it's quite a heightened sort of romance to, the whole production. Not just in in sort of love scene kind of respect. Everything about it that has it kind of is very of its time. So I think time is moving on quickly. Obviously, why George didn't do another Bond is because times have changed so quickly. The counterculture of Easy Rider, everyone growing their hair long. It was a real kind of turning point. I think that Terence Stamp once said that he was kind of the actor that fell off the edge of a decade. After the 60s, he didn't really work much in the 70s either. So I think that it was a real point of fulcrum that everything changed, not just, Diamonds Are Forever changed. Everything changed because the 70s came along and it was a completely different decade. And I think the change happened really quickly. I think that even in With Nail and I, isn't he, Danny says at the end, the greatest decade known to mankind is about to come to an end. And I feel that On Her Majesty's Secret Service kind of signifies that as well. It was kind of like, it was the beginning and the end of something all almost at once, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense, John. It's like the end of the 60s, everyone said was Altamont, with the Rolling Stones. I actually always think Her Majesty's Secret Service was the end of the 60s because it was released in December 1969. And
exactly,
if you think
right
about the 60s,
end.
You think about the Beatles or Bond as the cultural icons of that decade. And the fact that Bond was coming to an end, it was released, and that it was the most, how can we say, controversial Bond film up to that time, and people just left it after the end scene, which we still obviously will touch on when we get to it. People left the cinema thinking, that's not how a James Bond movie ends. It ends with an explosion and him in a dinghy. So it was an interesting thing, and it was basically saying goodbye to the 60s. And you're right, absolutely right on that front. And I think it's the perfect movie to look back on and say, right, okay, the 60s ended here in December 1969 with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, because it had all the touches, all the beautiful cinematography that they built up, the type Freddie Young had built up with, You Only Live Twice. And you've got to remember that Peter Hunt got this movie basically because he'd saved the Bond franchise umpteen times with his editing. You know, From Russia with Love, he came in and made that fight scene with Robert Shaw so great. He'd gone in there, he'd saved, he'd done all the second unit stuff on You Only Live Twice. He basically did so much, and because he did that, they basically said, you know, he was supposed to be given You Only Live Twice to direct, and they got Lewis Gilbert in. He was so angry, or upset, I should say, because he wasn't that kind of angry person. I met him, a lovely, lovely man, and he was upset, so he went off travelling, and he was in a hotel in the Far East. And as luck would have it, Albert Broccoli was there as well because they were hunting for locations, and he bumped into Peter, into Peter Hunt, and he said, "Well, look, if you help us out with You Only Live Twice in second unit direction, we'll give you a Majesty's Secret Service." Now, Peter Hunt knew that by far and away the best book, and the one he'd always wanted to do, was a Majesty's Secret Service, so he leapt on the chance, and he did a wonderful job. And the people who he brought, like Willie Bogner, who would then be used again and again by the bomb team, on Spy Who Loved Me and what have you, and For Your Eyes Only, his effect of being able to ski backwards is incredible. And Joey Jordan, who did all those, did all those amazing aerial shots where he was hung under the helicopter so they could follow all the skiers going across the top of the mountains and everything. It is one of the most beautiful Bond films to look at, and as John has touched on, helped, in no short form, by the fact that it's one of John Barry's most beautiful and eclectic soundtracks of all time. It's got everything you want. It's got the amazing theme to start off with, which, as you know, you could actually drop in at this point, Nick, if you get the chance. Yep. If you just listen to this is the first time synthesizers were used on a big film, in a big Hollywood film, and it is a classic. And Majesty Secret Service is actually being covered probably more times than any Bond film bar Goldfinger, by the Propeller Heads and the like. It is an amazing piece of music. the softer side of it, you've got the wonderful We Have All the Time in the World, which I've sent you that link from. That's from the original promo that was sent out to cinemas, the one that I've sent you with the little intro at the beginning there. But there's, and as John said, one of the great Christmas tunes that him and I always quote on our Christmas cards to each other. Do you know how Christmas trees are grown? There's
I also
so
love
many...
the song Try, the track Try.
Try is a really wonderful beautiful piece of music.
Journey to
Warfeld's Hideaway is up there with, Capsule in Space as one of Barry's greatest pieces of music. And, I'm not hopping on about, but, when I sat down with him and I said, what is your favourite soundtrack you've ever done? He said, well, my favourite theme is Goldfinger. He said, but I love On Her Majesty's Secret Service. He loved that because he was, and you've got to remember that he was at the absolute peak of his powers at this point. He was doing Vendetta and all this kind of stuff. He was on amazing form. And a couple of years later would then do what I think is his masterwork, which is the theme from The Persuaders. So you'd had You Only Live Twice, then this. I mean, and as I've said on the previous cast, John Barry is James Bond in a way. It didn't matter which actor was playing him. If John Barry was doing the soundtrack, it was a Bond film, and that's exactly what happened here. And he brought his absolute, magnum opus to the screen with this one. It is a fantastic piece of work, and the music is a character within the movie itself and carries Lazenby on beautifully and gives him something to his own character, especially you saying, John, Try. What an amazing piece of music that is. One of the best, the casino and everything. It's truly wonderful.
I love Louis Armstrong singing.
There's a great story behind that because John Barry, I sat, and I said, is it true that your favorite thing you ever did was on We Have All the Time in the World? He said, well, the story behind that was that Louis Armstrong was really ill. And he hadn't done anything for a long time, but he had played my dad's. John Barry's dad used to be a cinema owner, and he owned lots of theatres and cinemas, especially up in York, where John Barry was from, which is a beautiful part of England. And Louis Armstrong had played there, and John Barry's dad had said that Louis Armstrong was his favourite musician of all time, and at the time, the producers were pushing for someone who would, who was very much of the time. And he said, no, I've written a song that I really want Louis Armstrong to do. Louis Armstrong was dying at the time. He was very, very unwell. And this was the last thing he ever recorded.
Yeah.
The last thing he ever recorded was this. And what a song to go on. Obviously, he'd already sang It's a Wonderful World. Wonderful World's a great song. But Majesty's Secret Service is, the platform for this wonderful love song, which is not only one of the great Bond love songs, but one of the great love songs of all time. It's constantly on radio over here. And if you remember, John, we were talking about the decade when GoldenEye came back and Laddism came in and things like Loaded and what have you. One of the knock-on effects from that, not only was everyone watching The Italian Job again, but On Her Majesty's Service was constantly referenced and brought it to the status it is now. But We Have All the Time in the World was used on an advert for Guinness, and it went back into the charts and got to number 3 in 1995 or something. So it's quite amazing.
Wow.
And it's to this day, it's used on... In fact, I saw an advert with it on just last night.
Wow.
On TV using it, yeah. So it's...
Also, you had a second dance at my wedding.
Really?
Is that right? What was the first?
Yeah. Nobody does it better.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
nice.
No.
Double whammy.
Double whammy. Well, this is the kind of geeks I'm afraid to say. John and I are, at the end of the day, we love geeking out. At my wedding, I wanted The Wedding by John Barry from You Only Live Twice, but no music existed. So one of Emma's cousins is an amazing musician. He can play things by ear, and so he came to our house. He listened to this piece of music, The Wedding, and annotated it, got it back, played it on the organ, went to the church, played it on the organ, and then we had his wife play the triangle where she comes in. So, and I'll never forget, I was standing there waiting for Emma to come in her beautiful dress that our friends had designed, and I was thinking, this is very exciting. And she was late. And I bet the guy standing next to me was saying, I think she's had second thoughts and all this kind of stuff. All right. And my dad came up to me, and he looked really white. He said, bloody hell, son. I said, what is it? And I thought he was going to say she's not coming. And he said, your mate's just told me you got the James Bond bloody theme when she walks up the aisle. And I went, what? And he said, no one's going to come up to do. He said, what? That's probably why she's not turning up. And I said, no, Dad, it's The Wedding by John Barry from You Only Live Twice. It's not the James Bond theme. Imagine she'd be dropping to her knees and pointing a pistol, man, coming up the aisle. And he thought that, we'd had the James Bond theme. She was, imagine it, ding, diddling, ding. I don't think so, Dad. Bless his heart. But it's weird that we've never talked about that, John, I don't think. That's amazing. I just found that out.
That's a new one.
Yeah, good one. So there we are.
Not that we digress or anything.
Oh, no.
Never. John. Not that we do.
Never.
Never.
Well,
imagine John and I at the pub.
We have a joke on this podcast about all the rabbit holes that we keep stepping in, and I'm a professional rabbit chaser, so that's what I do. So.
Well, it was amazing. John and I were there with the guys from loads of stuff last year, including Graham Humphreys and everyone, and it was a great night, wasn't it, John? We will go off on tangents, but we've done that quite a bit. So let's get back to this one, and let's touch on just Peter Hunt, because, as John said, he did a brilliant job on this film, and I'd love to have seen him come back. And he did wonderful films. I mean, the closest thing he did to this was probably Gold, which is a wonderful film with Roger Moore, funnily enough, which is great. But do you want to quickly touch on him, Nick?
Well, yeah. I mean, Peter Hunt, he was, obviously he was, for our purposes, his big one was being director of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But I think he had a big career working in, he started out he was involved with The Thief of Baghdad all the way back in 1940. And, going forward into more modern films, he was involved with, he was the editor for Goldfinger. He was an editor on Dr. No. He was an editor on Thunderball. And as you said, his work as an editor really saved a lot of the action sequences and the fight stuff, because there's a thing that, in filmmaking, they say the director and the actors are kind of like the wood and the timber and the materials you build a house with. The editor is the one that actually puts the house together and makes your movie. And so that skill as an editor really came to play in the James Bond series, and that's what gave him the opportunity to, to direct On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah, his editing in From Russia With Love and that fight scene is exceptional. It reached its strange peak, though, in Thunderball, where I don't know why, but the producers speeded up the film when they're on the Disco Volante at the end. And the only thing that can possibly keep up with this, which looks like a Max Sennett movie at one point, it just speeds up so ridiculously, is because Peter Hunt's editing is so quick and precise that it carries it off, and it's still an exciting fight, even though it's going at twice the rate it should be. He's a genius when it comes to editing. He really is.
Now that you brought that up, that is true, because they did have a habit of just zipping certain bits of the action. They would speed it up a lot. And I know you occasionally do that with some of your car stuff to make the car stuff look more exciting. But they would speed up a lot of just, hey, we're having a fist fight, and okay, there you go. But I think he did a bang-on job with that stuff. And he's been involved in so many interesting movies. He was the director for Rough Cut, which, that's a Burt Reynolds film that I happen to like.
Yeah, I've never seen that. I'd love to see that film.
Oh, that's one to check out. It's from about 1980.
And
David
Burt
Reynolds
was one of the forerunners to James Bond in Time for Forever. Yeah.
And, he did so many interesting, and the one that you brought up also was Gold. I haven't watched that movie in years, but that's such a good film. And he also did Shout at the Devil,
which is great.
It's another Roger Moore film, isn't it?
Yeah. So he worked with Moore a lot, apparently. I never even thought about
my friend's dad took me to see Gold, and I thought it stuck with me because I love Everybody Loves for Gold. Great soundtrack. Really fantastic.
I love it when you sing it, Mark.
No, I love it. I could go on. Around the lady's neck. I love that song. Anyway, but there's a bit where Roger Moore's in the bath with Susanna York, and I remember that was the first twinges of my, ooh, that looks good, and I remember my friend's dad looked at me, because I was obviously I leant forward, and I went back and told my mum and dad, and they said, what was the movie like? I said, Roger Moore was in the bath with this girl, and he got an absolute rollicking.
Another Bond connection with Peter Hunt was with his Wild Geese 2.
Yeah, he did Wild Geese 2, yeah.
Yeah, because that had Barbara Carrera in it from Never Say Never Again.
Yes.
Yeah, he was great as Fatima Blush. Wonderful. That's one of the only good things in Never Say Never Again. But it's great. Who else was in? It was in Wild Geese 2. It wasn't Lee Van Cleef. Who else was in it?
Got Glenn.
Good action movies.
Yeah, it was
Edward
Barbara
Fox.
Carrera,
Laurence Olivier, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laurence Olivier was in that. Ingrid Pitt was in it briefly. Oh, and Patrick Stewart.
Really?
Huh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Right.
sorry. I'm doing real time. I just did a quick lookup on it. And yeah, there's quite a few people in there. Richard Burton, of course, pops up in it, but that's all archive footage from the first movie. You know, they had Burton and Harris, but again, it's just, hey, we're going to pad the movie out by showing a bunch of stuff from the first movie.
Have you ever done The Wild Geese? That would be a great one to do in the cast.
No, we haven't.
Oh, it's a wonderful film. Wild Geese.
Oh, no, it is that's a great film. I love it, Mary. But I think if we're going to start down that road, we have to start with Gold, though. Do that first.
Everybody loves Gold.
Okay, we're only going to do Gold if I can get a recording of Mark singing.
No. There's another connection, actually, with Bond, with Rough Cut, with Cassandra Harris is in that as well.
Oh.
Right, yeah, Pierce Brosnan's wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
6 degrees of separation, or 007 degrees of separation.
See, we always come back to it, John. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Well,
so that's Peter Hunt, brilliant editor, brilliant second unit director. Is there anything else we want to touch on with Peter?
Didn't he call it crash cutting?
He was the fastest editor on the planet. I mean, he was, properly great, and he would turn things around, reverse stuff. He would try things that people just wouldn't believe. And I know Stanley Kubrick was a big fan of his. He thought he was an absolutely brilliant editor. So praise doesn't come much higher than that, really, to be honest. But from that, should we touch on George? Obviously, we've discussed what a character he is in real life, but and this being obviously his big film of his career, but he also did one which, Nick, I can't believe you haven't seen, which I am so keen for you to see, which is The Man from Hong Kong, which is truly great. Great film, and perfect for this cast.
It's funny because you sent that link, Mark, and I'll post this on the B Movie Cast show notes for the page, but Mark sent a link of what if George Lazenby had starred in Diamonds Are Forever. And so a fan group had cut together the bits from, it looks like The Man from Hong Kong and On Her Majesty's Secret Service to make that work. And it was a fun little bit to watch. I mean,
well, it actually had the ending as it was supposed to be. So it had the ending as the pre-credit sequence, which is exactly what was going to happen. I sent that to you as well, didn't I, John?
That's right.
It's really, really, really well done. And I sent that to George Lazenby. You're not going to believe this. I also sent it. So I sent it to you guys, and I sent it to George Lazenby's manager, Andres, who's a lovely, lovely fella, and does from Sweden with Love. Really lovely guy. And he said, you're not going to believe it. I've got George Lazenby sitting next to me now. I'm going to show him it. Surreal, isn't it?
Oh, that's awesome.
So he said, I'm going to show the big man now. There you go. So I hope George enjoyed it.
I was going to say, I wonder, did he enjoy it?
I don't know yet. I haven't heard back.
Okay, you got to find out for us because that's fun.
I will. I'll drop him a line.
But yeah, I mean, okay, George Lazenby, what a story about how he got the role. I mean, that's just, wow. And that being his first movie role. I mean, think about this. You're an actor. You are just going along being an actor, or in his case, you're a male model who does TV commercials occasionally, and your first big role is, I'm going to be James Bond, a decade-long established character. This will be the 6th film in the franchise. Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and take the reins on that. Wow. That seems like such a weight to take on, and I think, that would be tough for anybody. But I really was impressed with how he played the character. And I got to say, and I touched on this a little bit before John came on the cast, but one of the things that I noticed watching it this time with a more critical eye was that as James Bond, Lazenby brought a certain air of sophistication to it, I felt. He felt more like more of a society Bond is how I saw it. You know, the Connery Bond felt to me like he's the Bond that goes out and gets dirty and does the killing and he takes care of business. This Bond to me felt more like a real spy because he could blend into things and he could play the society better. That's how, and that may have just been me, but I felt like that worked for him. Now, of the two, I would say if you put Sean Connery's Bond up against Lazenby's Bond, my money would be on Connery's Bond because he just came across more ruthless. But I could definitely see Lazenby's Bond definitely being able to seduce more women than Sean Connery's Bond,
really?
Oddly enough.
Okay,
yes,
I think of it totally opposite.
He had that certain debonairness about him that I think Connery was lacking. And that's not saying Connery wasn't cool and that he didn't have a presence.
Yeah.
But there was a certain amount of debonair. That's the word I was looking for, I think, that went with this guy.
See,
Lazenby really brought it.
I always think that Connor had more of the society feel to him, that coolness.
Well, he had the coolness, don't get me wrong there, but I think it was...
Lazenby does fit in better, but, I think he plays a spy better. But I think Connor just had, I don't know.
Well, Connery had a certain...
Yeah.
Connery was Connery.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you know, and that's the other thing. It's tough to walk into a franchise and try and fill somebody's shoes.
That's true.
Because no matter what you do, all people are going to do initially is compare you to the last one.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just got to be hard for an actor. But and he's done.
It's probably just my viewpoint, but Lazenby just doesn't seem as sexy to me as Bond.
Is that why you asked me before, Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Lazenby is the least sexy Bond.
Yeah.
And that's not getting away from George. We know George and George has done very, very well in life, as we've discussed earlier on, sausage or not. But he's done very, very well. And he married he married Pam Shriver, didn't he, John? The tennis player, and he's made a fortune off real estate. So he's done incredibly well. Bless his heart, he's done brilliantly. So hats off to George. But yeah, as far as sexy Bonds go, George, it may be one of the sexiest Bond films, but I don't think he's the sexiest Bond. I think he's a more rugged Bond. I think it's because of his Australian background and hearing the stories about the fact that he got the job by knocking out one of the stuntmen. Harry, he was supposed to be practicing and broke the stuntman's nose. You know that bit where they're fighting in that room where he goes back to see Tracy? That was actually staged. And he knocked the guy out virtually, broke his nose. And Harry Saltzman just said, "We're going with you," because he was so much of a man's man and he could knock anybody out. And he was a big guy. And I think, that's. But when it comes to romance, obviously Roger Moore, very au fait, but that was the 70s. And as John touched on before, this is the last of the Bonds of the 60s. When it came to the 70s, the decades changed and humour became far more prevalent. And everyone goes on about humour coming into the Bond series with Roger Moore. That is absolute nonsense. You look at Diamonds Are Forever, it is riddled with, be it brilliant, one-liners all the way through. It is off-the-cuff humour all the way through, plenty of, when you were a brunette or a blonde, well, as long as the collars and cuffs match, things like that, Plenty O'Toole when she's got those huge chests lying over the gambling table, named after your father, perhaps. I mean, just brilliant stuff, and it was written by the guy who wrote Batman, as we touched on, before, Semple. So, it's Tom Mackinwitz. Some brilliant writers, and when it started off in the 70s, it was a lot more flippant, and the world had changed, and Britain had lost its top, I was telling you that, talking to you before about the fact that when GoldenEye came out, Britain had regained its cool Britannia vibe, But Britain lost that through the entire 70s. Because it was there was strikes. It wasn't a very nice place to live. It was, it was made up by punk. Punk was reflecting its time. People were angry. It was an aggressive time. There was 3-day week working. We had power strikes where you could only walk around the house with candles. I mean, it was really an unpleasant place to be with all of the bin men going on strike. So litter was everywhere. It wasn't a cool place to be. Whereas in the 60s, Britain on Carnaby Street and, King's Road was the coolest place in the world to be.
Definitely.
And I think that kind of mirrored it. That's why Bond moved to America with Diamonds Are Forever. And that's why it was set in America, because America was becoming the place to be with Las Vegas. It's where Elvis was just starting in residency there, and Sammy Davis Jr., all the big stars were going there. So, the emphasis had moved, and yet it came back, and it didn't come back properly, probably until, GoldenEye, when Cool Britannia came back in. But it is interesting. But of all the Bonds, you've got that strange mix with Pierce Brosnan where he is a bit Connery and a bit Moore, so he's like a hybrid of the two. I think Dalton was very dark and brooding, and he's probably the most action Bond. The only problem Dalton's Bond ever had was the fact that he couldn't deliver a funny line in the way Connery could, or the way Roger Moore could. And to be honest, Daniel Craig is a great Bond, don't get me wrong, but he struggles with that as well.
Yeah.
He has not got the panache to carry off a funny line and make it really funny. Whereas George can.
Yeah.
George Lazenby can carry it off. Like, this never happened to the other fella, as you quoted before, and, he branched off and all this kind of stuff. He can carry it off. He does a very good job of it.
Okay, my whole problem with James Bond is, growing up in the 60s and the counterculture, I looked at James Bond, Sean Connery James Bond, and thought, he's just an old guy. He's just part of the establishment. So I never liked the James Bond movies because they were old school. They were people in suits and clean haircuts and stuff, and I was looking at it thinking, this guy's supposed to be a spy and he's blending in, but, in my world, he would have stuck out like a sore thumb. And that's why I kind of liked Lazenby's whole take on it, because not wanting to do James Bond again, I kind of understand what his publicist was telling him about the world was changing and that character doesn't exist anymore. You know what I mean?
No. You're a hippie. No, it's in a nice way.
That was kind of it for me.
You are Bohemian.
Yeah, and that's kind of why.
So you look at it as an artist and a hippie and a Bohemian, and you see someone in a dinner suit and you think no. But in all honesty, even when I started in the 90s, and John, you can back me up here, people were still walking around with bowler hats in the West End in the posh offices. Yeah?
Wow.
Things hadn't changed that much. And remember, James Bond's a British character, so
yeah.
But
yeah.
when it comes to Majesty's Secret Service, John has absolutely hit it on the head. The look of it, the use of purple, which was the ultimate sort of 60s colour, and all that, and the fact that he's in a kilt most of the time with a frilly shirt. It's a bit like Department S or something like that. Before that all happened, it set the law before Lord Brett Sinclair. It was all that sort of kind of look, the flouncy look, and it fitted in perfectly.
Yeah.
And he was hardly in a suit. And the one scene where James Bond was really in a suit was cut from the movie. There's a bit where he goes to Gumball's library and he takes a photocopy of all the stuff about Blofeld and his history. After that, there was a whole scene filmed where someone had spotted him. He chased them across London, and that's when, as John rightly said, Lazenby looks brilliant in a suit. He fits a suit beautifully. But there was a whole sequence there which was cut out where he was across the rooftops chasing them around around the Albert Hall and stuff like that. That was all cut out. But most of the time, he's in a ski suit, which looks pretty cool. He's in a kilt, or a frilly shirt. So he's the most un-Bond Bond up to that point because he's not really in a dinner jacket.
Yeah.
And this is highlighted in the fact that I truly love the poster for him. I'm sitting next to it now. When we met George that time, John, when we went to that screening, and I've got that sign that's sitting to the left of me now because I always put it up at Christmas because it's a Christmas Bond film. But the posters that are the best. I always think the Americans and the British do it the best, but for a Majesty Secret Service, the best ones with the Italians, because they've done a brilliant art. It's very similar, but he's in a polo neck. And that would be more sensible. If you're on skis, you're not going to be in a dinner jacket.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And Tracy's in a ski suit, and he's in a you know, like a turtleneck. Whereas in the British one and the American one, she's in a cocktail dress and he's in a dinner suit.
Mm-hmm.
It works far better in the poster than that. What you've just said there, Mary, is summed up in that poster, in the fact that in reality, this is what he would look like if he was part of the time. She would be in a really groovy, you know, ski suit. He would be in a polo neck rather than a dinner jacket.
Right.
And that sort of is unusual. But I know what you're saying about the times. Yeah, they were changing. But the guy who did say that, who ran, Caroline, Radio Caroline stuff, that was bad advice. And I think he George should have actually done, you know, or even if he didn't do another movie, just not listen to what other people had to say.
Yeah.
You know. But then again, as we touched on going back, we wouldn't have had The Man from Hong Kong, which is basically George Lazenby as James, you know, not sort of an anti-Bond in that film. And I think you really need to do that, Nick, because again, like Gold, and no, I'm not going to sing it, but like Gold, it's got great theme tunes called Sky High by Pilot, which is fantastic. Absolutely brilliant film. And of course it's Dave, it's one of his favorites. Dave sent me a copy of it. It's a really great film, and I think out of all of us, he could do a very good job of Man from Hong Kong. But it's great. But try and watch it, Nick, because it's great. Because George he did wonderful things. And he obviously ended up doing, although he did 7 Emmanuel TV movies. Where does that come from? Heaven knows. I only knew that when I looked it up. But what they were, I don't know. How can you have a TV movie for Emmanuel, for goodness sake? But he did Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and I love the fact that was called Diamonds Aren't Forever, which is really good. And obviously he played JB007 in The Return of the Man from U.N.C.L.E., which is a lovely cameo, one of the great cameos. And when Roger Moore did the same kind of thing in the Gumball Ride, what was it that he did, the Cannonball Run?
The Cannonball Run,
when he played James Bond in the Cannonball Run as Goldfarb. You know, he was great and he's really, really funny. But Lazenby actually plays James Bond rather than Roger Moore playing Goldfarb, who thinks he's James Bond. Lazenby actually does play James Bond, even though they weren't allowed to say it. And his number plate is JB007, I think, on the car. So it's brilliantly done. But also, Lazenby did some really interesting things. He did stuff like Freddy's Nightmares, but he also was in 2 of my favourite 80s programs, which are never really mentioned now, which were so great, and I never missed one of them. One of them was Cover Up. And it was this guy who was a model, but he was also a secret agent. And it's where the theme, you know, I'm holding out for a hero. You know, I want a hero. I want a hero for the rest of the time. The one that was
remember that. Yeah.
That, from Cover Up. Erickson, I think he was called, and he died sadly, like the Baldwin incident, because there was a blank in a gun, and he killed himself by mistake by saying, "What's this one?" In the same way, Bruce Lee's son died that way, and he was also in The Master, which was a great program that I never missed with Lee Van Cleef. The Master. You know, that was a great program. Actually, while we're on, John, are you still there, by the way? Or am I rambling?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening.
I'll tell this and then you take over. But when we were in that talk, he did that amazing story. So obviously we've touched upon Once Upon a Time in Hollywood before on the podcast. But the bit where Brad Pitt's stunt guy plays that bit where he goes in with Bruce Lee, that was confirmed by George Lazenby as being about him, because he obviously, when he lost the Bond role and wasn't going to do it anymore, he then became really good friends with Bruce Lee, George Lazenby, and he flew out to meet Bruce Lee because he was going to be starring in Game of Death. Now, that didn't happen, obviously, for all the reasons we know, but he flew out there, but when he got there, there was this huge hurricane. Do you remember him telling this story, John? And that he was waiting in the alleyway, his shop fronts and everything, and doors were blowing past him. Bruce Lee opened the door with some women who I'm not sure you're supposed to be with and invited him in to go in, and he had a meeting with Bruce Lee all about this film, and it was going to be brilliant. And then, obviously, he found out that he was dead, and he was devastated. But the bit about Bruce Lee was based on a story that George told that day, which was the fact that he was standing round, and Bruce Lee had gone round, and he was standing around with all these stuntmen, exactly how it is in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Brad Pitt. And he said, "How long do you think you'd last if I punched you? How long do you think you'd last? How long do you think you'd last?" And he went round, and he got to George, And George says, however quick I can run away and how long it would take you to catch me. And when he said that, Bruce Lee thought that was hilarious because obviously he was James Bond. He was saying he would just run off, and, and then, and he liked that. And him and Bruce Lee became really, really good friends. And it's amazing that whole scene that's in, obviously Tarantino's heard that story and used it in the film. So that is George Lazenby. That's from his life rather than Brad Pitt the stuntman, which I find fascinating. Someone else can talk.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, that's... We hit one of those awkward Mark silences.
Well, I was just waiting for him to go on.
Well, I don't want to go on too much.
Now, he just went off the edge of a cliff and a Union Jack parachute popped out.
He was on skis.
Actually, you mentioned that, John. That scene was actually in on A Majesty's Secret Service. It was written for A Majesty's Secret Service, and then was later used as the pre-credit scene on Spy Who Loved Me. But it was originally the bit where he was being chased on one ski. He was supposed to then go off the cliff and parachute down into where the ice rink was, where he meets Tracy.
I was expecting him to.
Yeah, but in '69, so that didn't happen. But it was reused to a much greater effect. It's got to be said. In Spy Who Loved Me. But the one thing that always got me, John, I was like you when I was a kid and I first saw it on TV and they said he's got lots of guts and it turned red. It was amazing. A terrible edit on that. If you watched it again, there's a bit of red snow comes out before he even gets in there. It's really bad. There are so many bad edits on A Majesty's Secret Service. We're talking about Peter Hunt being brilliant. But there are many mistakes. There's bits where dialogue come from nowhere, like when they're in the rally, Diana Rigg says, "How do we get out?" Where does that come from? She's got a mouth. She's obviously a ventriloquist as well, which is really good. But, you've got loads of stuff which happens, which is off camera, and Royal Beluga, south of the Casimir, and all this kind of stuff. He's got his mouth full of Beluga. How can he talk? There are so many things where dialogue's been added in just to speed it all up. And there's a bit where they're going on about radioactive lint at the beginning of the film. That's a terrible edit, and I've always wanted to know if something was cut out there at that beginning where Q's giving the talk. And when that was first shown on television, it was even more pronounced. It would even miss the bit where Q's saying, "This is radioactive lint." It would cut that out when it was first shown on British television. Wow. So it's interesting. But while we're on that, it's really worth mentioning the fact that when you guys got it on TV, you got the ABC cut, which is really famous, the fact that it completely cut up the movie. And so it started off with the ski chase and the escape from Piz Gloria at the beginning.
Wow.
Really?
With a voiceover by someone pretending to be George Lazenby, who sounds nothing like George Lazenby, doing a monologue over the top. If you go onto onto YouTube or something, it may be on there. I know Eon tried to take it off several times. But it's called either the NBC or the ABC cut, and it's unbelievable. I've got a full DVD of it, the cut.
Wow.
It's horrific, and I wanted to see it for years and years and years, but when I watched it, I couldn't quite believe what I was watching and how that was allowed to be done. They cut out huge segments of the film and put the middle of the film at the beginning. It's surreal.
Well, and that's the thing. When TV gets a hold of a movie, they have to jam it into a 2-hour slot with 20 to 30 minutes for commercials, right? So, of course, they're going to cut stuff out. And, either that or for a movie like this that was, 2 hours and 20 minutes long, they could have taken it and made it into 2 nights even. Yeah. But rather than do it the right way, it sounds like they did it the easy way, which is to cut out all the plots so you
don't know what's going on.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. It's got to be seen to be believed. Check it out. It's really incredible, and it's got this. You would have thought they would have even got George Lazenby to do the talk, but they don't. And it's so George Lazenby obviously was very unhappy that he was dubbed halfway through. But in the American screening, it's got someone else who doesn't even sound like James Bond, talking over the top, saying, "I was on a mission down in Blood." And you think, what the hell is going on? It was incredible they got away with it. To be honest, it really is.
I will say this, I'm very glad I missed that because, my introduction to James Bond was watching the Roger Moore movies when they came on television in the 70s and then in the early 80s. And by that point, TV, they didn't really play the classic Bond films At least not on, ABC, NBC, CBS that I was watching. But then in the 80s, the early 90s when I was in college, I subscribed to MGM, did this thing where you could subscribe and they would send you a VHS of a James Bond movie in order every month. And so, it was like a 18-month subscription, and I think it ran for a few years, and I ended up getting all of the ones they did, which I think went all the way up to License to Kill. But the films that they did on the VHS, a lot of them I had never seen because they weren't circulating through the, broadcast television so much. The only ones I ever got to see were the Roger Moore ones. So that was my introduction to George Lazenby, because my parents loved Sean Connery, so they rented the Sean Connery movies, and we would watch those.
Yeah.
But they never said a word about the Lazenby film, and I'm like, ooh, what's this one? And I literally, I'm 20-something, didn't know my butt from a hole in the ground, and I was just like, oh, okay, let's watch this. I'm like, who's that guy? So, I was really surprised by it.
I mean, I got a shock when I first saw Lazenby as Bond on TV when we got them when they ran in the 70s, and I was thinking, what? Who's this? Because I knew about Connery and I knew Roger Moore because he was the current Bond, but I had no idea about this, and it blew my mind, and it was again, a standalone film, and I was going, wow, what's that? It was like the Casino Royale, the funny version, the 67 version. It didn't seem to be part of the franchise. It seemed to be a standalone. But, it's interesting because when I first saw Dr. No, I taped it off TV, and I told you that story where I gave a guy, a couple of movie posters, one of which is worth $4,000 now, and it really pisses me off every time I think about it. But, there was so much cut out of that TV showing of Dr. No, like the bit where Dr. No comes and pulls the sheet back, and loads of dialogue was missing. And it wasn't until it came out on VHS that I realized that I'd missed all of these scenes out. But, John, you're bringing you back in. Hello there.
I'm here.
You nearly had the chance of looking after the franchise on home ends at one point, didn't you?
Yeah, I got down to the last two people. I was so gutted. Yeah,
so what happened there?
So it was at the time I was a video buyer for a chain called Music and Video Club, who don't exist anymore in the UK. So I was looking to break out and get a job as in product marketing, and it was the VHS market at the time in the late 90s. And there's I went for a job at MGM Home Entertainment, who were based in Hammersmith in London, and I got down to the last two to be the James Bond product manager, which is like a dream job. I can't believe I missed out by one person. It went to a woman in the end, called Margaret Murray, and I was very jealous of her. But eventually I got a job at Universal Pictures doing that kind of thing, but I didn't work on any of the Bond films. But when I was just as an aside, when I was a buyer when GoldenEye came out on video, and MGM flew the buyers out to Monte Carlo. Well, I guess we flew to Nice in the south of France, and then we got picked up by helicopter, taken into Monte Carlo, where we had dinner at the Café de Paris, and then they gave us all the equivalent of what 50 euros is now to go to the Casino Royale, and I lost it all, I think, in 2 goes on blackjack. It was, and then we stayed at the Negresco Hotel in Nice, and it was just an incredible experience. I mean, you wouldn't, none of that kind of thing would happen these days. It would be seen to be sort of bribery and corruption, but yeah, that was an incredible trip. So that was kind of my kind of brush with James Bond in the sort of professional world.
Well, it puts my one on the Shilthorn to shame. That's Monte Carlo. Bloody hell, that's great. It's funny because, the one thing I didn't say was that I had one day off from when I was doing the photographs on that thing to go up to Piz Gloria, and Emerald, I was so excited. And we got halfway up, and it was snowed in, and we couldn't go any further, so I never got to go. And I was so upset. I was kicking the tram and everything, and Emma said I was like a petulant child, But the one thing I did get was a mug, because they sold them halfway up. So I've got a George Lazenby mug, which makes me sad every time I think about it, thinking I never did get there. You know, but there we are. Such is life. But Monaco, that's pretty good. But John, I've told the story about us flying on Eddie the Head when we flew to Cannes that time.
Oh, yeah, that's a different story.
You know,
Chemical Wedding.
Absolutely.
That's a B movie.
That's another one I've got to thank you for. Yeah, but we were crapping ourselves. We were right next to him in the pilot seat. That was great. So, you know, that was good fun. But there you go. We've had some good laughs, I tell you.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I came very close to being the James Bond product manager, but it wasn't to be.
You know. Well, closer than any of us have been, mate.
We like hearing the stories.
Well,
so it's worth something.
We've done a few. I mean, there was one. I mean, I touched on the fact, John, that when we went out with Jane Middlemass when we did that video shoot over in Ibiza.
Love yoga, yeah. Actually, I just remembered. Actually, I had another thing when I was at bar. I got a set visit to Tomorrow Never Dies.
Right.
Somewhere near St Albans, and they were filming the motorcycle jump with Michelle Yeoh in the back street, and that was just all basically that whole scene was somewhere near St Albans, doubling for Indonesia or wherever it was, and I remember we kind of drove on up, as a group of us, and Pierce Brosnan, you could see him mouthing, "Oh, not more people," because he had to come over and then put on the charm and smile and then we saw a rough cut of one of the scenes, and they put a Pat Metheny track on as one of the as the sort of background music, temporary music. I'm a massive Pat Metheny fan, so that was really cool. I'm just recalling these things now; they're coming back to me. But that was a really cool thing to do, that set visit.
The one thing I remember, John, is when we went for that Ibiza, there was this guy, and John and I were having a really good time. We weren't taking it too seriously, but getting what we needed done.
I've never taken anything too seriously.
Yeah, I know.
Where's
Ibiza? We went to this amazing place at night.
Spanish Island.
It was on a beach. Okay. It was on a beach, and we were sitting in this hut on a beach, and there was this guy. Do you remember Ryan, John?
Ryan Spielman, yeah. He was like Madonna's yoga teacher.
Him, but he was this Adonis of a man, and he was Madonna's personal trainer or something, wasn't he?
He didn't need the Frankfurter.
Yeah, exactly. We all had too much to drink, and it was Ryan's idea to go down to the sea, and it was a beautiful moonlit night, and we had all this drink, and we went down, and John and I were wandering around, and we thought, this is going to be interesting, and people started to strip off going into that, and Ryan stripped off. One look at Ryan, who should have worn 3 shoes, and we turned back.
Aww.
We thought, there's no way we're going to be doing that.
Talk about a scene stealer.
Aww.
It was a scene stealer, mate. As I said, there was 3 tracks as he ran into the sea.
Yeah, we had to depart. Sudden stiffness coming on the shoulder.
Yeah, and the left shoulder. Yes. All right. Yeah. Back to the Majesty Secret Service. We must touch on Diana Rigg, who's probably one of the classics. My youngest daughter's favourite Bond girl. Most favourite Honeychild, but Xanthi loves Tracy.
Me too.
They both love her. Well, she's a great actress.
Well, Tracy was a great character too, because some of the Bond girls they're pretty baggage. Yeah. And some of the Bond girls, I swear, are actively opposing James Bond, even if they're not. And I think of the Man with the Golden Gun and some of the scenes that happened in that. But I think Tracy as a Bond, as a character, was one of the better Bond girls. I mean, she was resourceful. She
could have been Bond.
Yeah, she was a solid character, and I think it was interesting seeing her character evolve through the movie, and I think Diana Rigg really plays it well.
Yeah.
Because, she starts off, she's obviously troubled, but at the same time, she's still got this almost iron will underlying the troubled side of her, and I did think it was funny that the first thing she does is steal his car.
Yeah.
She steals James Bond's car and drives, and then leaves him to walk up the beach to pick it up, and that's the whole bit with the line, "Oh, this never happened to the other guy."
By the way, I was when I was watching that, I was wondering how he drove that car onto the beach, because it would have sunk in the sand.
Well,
it's not just that, Mary. The fact that when they screech it off, tires don't screech in sand either.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a screech where he does that. That wouldn't happen either. So just take it with a pinch of salt. Yeah, because that Aston Martin's about 2.5 tons, I think.
Yeah.
So, maybe it was just the hard sand. You get hard sand, so
sure.
Let's not forget.
Well,
I love the fact that do you know why she was called? I may have touched on this briefly, but do you know why she was called Emma Peel in the Avengers?
No.
Oh.
M Appeal, Man Appeal. Great.
Oh wow.
I've always loved that. I always thought that was a lovely bit of trivia.
That's
talking about trivia, hats off to the guy whose mum invented Tipex, who passed away this week, Mike Nesmith from the Monkees. I truly love the Monkees.
I know.
And that's a movie I'd love to do on the podcast. Head, one of my favourite films. I truly love Head.
You shouldn't really maybe rephrase that, Mark.
Text anybody.
Actually, I was going to say, I don't think he needs to rephrase it. I just never spelled this out.
I wouldn't believe I was on the B movie cast, would they? You know, I love Head.
Oh, dear.
Well, so much for the not explicit rating on Apple.
Exactly. But no, she's great. And another bit of trip I love is the fact that, you know, when they've got that picture of Tracy's mum in the film, that's actually Dinah Rigg's real mum. I love that. I think that's great.
That's cool.
But she played everything from, you know, a Bond girl. She was obviously well known for her Shakespeare over here, but she's, you know, Game of Thrones, didn't she? She ended up in Game of Thrones, Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah.
She's been in all sorts of stuff, but she one of my favourite, and I've never been a massive Diana Rigg fan. I've always found her a bit aloof. But she is great in the Avengers. There's no getting away from it. She's wonderful in all those Pierre Cardin costumes and everything. You're talking about style, John. There's nothing that encapsulates the 60s more looking at it than the Avengers with Patrick Neal. She was
absolutely.
Look at. But she was great in a movie which I don't know if you've ever covered on the B Movie Cast, which is an absolute gem called Theatre of Blood with Vincent Price. Have you ever seen that?
I have seen it, but
where they kill everybody by killing them in a Shakespearean way. Oh
no, we need to look at that one, Mary. That might be another one for the countdown, actually.
John, have you seen Theatre of Blood?
I don't think I have actually. I mean, maybe put it on TV years ago.
Dig it out. It's a bit like Dr. Phibes. In fact, it's very similar to Dr. Phibes. You know how he kills them from, you know, things in the Bible. Theatre of Blood is about a guy called Lionheart who gets terrible reviews, and he kills all the critics in a way from Shakespeare. It's brilliant. Honestly, guys, check it out. Wonderful, wonderful film. You should do that in the podcast. If you watch it, I'm sure you will. Same as Man from Hong Kong. You know, if you look at those two films, I'm sure they'd be two contenders for next year.
Definitely on Man from Hong Kong, and I think Theatre of Blood might actually be a really good addition. Now, you know, we talked about all the different films she's been in, but one that I like, and it's another one that might be good for the cast, she was in The Assassination Bureau that came out the same year as On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah.
And that's a fun little flick, and funny enough, she's in it with Telly Savalas.
Yeah, and is it Oliver Reed, The Assassination Bureau?
Yeah, Oliver Reed and Diana Rigg are the two leads in it, so...
Well, so let's go on to Telly Savalas now. You've mentioned him. I mean, obviously, a true. You know, the thing is that originally they were looking for several different actors, and I'd always sort of wondered if someone else would be better. The one I think would have been really good for Blofeld was Yul Brynner. I think he would have made a really good Blofeld, but it was never used. But Telly Savalas is great. But obviously, by the time I saw Majesty's Service, he was Kojak to me. And the shock of seeing Kojak, you know, without a lollipop,
I know.
You know, it was just like, what the hell? I couldn't believe it. But then, obviously, over the years, he's been in some amazing films. I mean, just to reel off some of my favorites, Horror Express, which is one of my all-time favorite films. You know, just brilliant. Capricorn 1. He's in it's such a small amount, but steals the show as the helicopter, as the plane pilot. He's just wonderful in that. He's in one of my favourite Mario Bava movies, which is Lisa and the Devil, which is it's always left out of the Mario Bava stuff, but I love Lisa and the Devil. He was in Kelly's Heroes. John Landis told some amazing stories about, you know, his time with on that film, especially with Telly Savalas. And probably one of my, you know, everyone knows him from The Dirty Dozen, but the Western that I love him in more than anything else is a movie called McKenna's Gold, which I love, which is great. Yes. Have you ever seen that, guys? About where they find the Valley of Gold by the rock pointing at it.
Oh yeah, that's a
the dog
fun
has.
film.
The dog loves it.
Oh yeah.
What about the dog? Yeah.
So yeah,
I have to mute myself
was great, and obviously he was in
Escape to Athena as well.
Escape to Athena, yes, of course, brilliant in that as well, and one of the great Twilight Zones as well with Living Doll, with Talkie Tina. I'm Talkie Tina, I love you. I love that. He's brilliant in that as well. So he's done so much, and he had a #1 over here in the charts by covering Bread's If. Have you ever heard that across there, guys? Was that a big hit over there?
What?
No, it wasn't.
Right. Okay, if you get a chance, Nick, look it up on the internet and insert it here, because it's what he talks all the way through it. It was a huge hit. Do you remember it, John?
I do.
If a picture paints 1,000 words, then why can't I paint you? He talks like that all the way through. It was a huge hit, #1 across here, 1973, I think. Amazing song. Check it out. Telly Savalas. It's incredible.
If a picture paints 1,000 words, then why can't I paint you? The words will never show the you I've come to know. And if a face could launch 1,000 ships, then where am I to go? There's no one home but you. You're all that's left me to. And when, my love, for life is running dry, you come and pour yourself on me. If a man could be 2 places at one time, well, I'd be with you tomorrow and today beside you all the way. If the world should stop revolving, spinning slowly down to die, I'd spend the end with you. And when the world was through, then one by one, the stars would all go out. Then you and I would simply fly away.
Who loves you, baby?
Who loves you? Yeah, what's going on, pussycat?
Hey, he was
I
nobody's
still love it.
But
there you go, guys. Anything you want to touch on with Telly?
Other than the fact that I love him in Kelly's Heroes and Horror Express, not really. I mean, he's a fun guy. I think my favorite role, though, that I've ever seen him in is possibly Horror Express, simply because he is just he's such a laissez-faire bastard in that. It's just, yes, well, I know I hold the power of life and death over everyone, so I'll just wander through here. And I just got the feeling when he was filming that he was just, mildly high the whole time.
He was mildly high. He was stoned out of his box. And, he used to make movies when he found out people were gamblers. And obviously the Bond producers are famous gamblers. I mean, Roger Moore and Cubby Broccoli were always gambling. In between, Roger Moore was always trying to win his money back off Cubby Broccoli. And, they were famous gamblers. But Telly Savalas came on, and for some reason, I don't know what the full reason is. It's well worth looking into. But when they were making Our Majesty's Service, I don't know if it was because it was in Switzerland or what, I don't know. But there were certain parts where people would be paid for in cash, in hand, in suitcases. Yeah, especially George Lazenby was paid cash in hand. Now, Telly Savalas knew that the Bond producers were big gamblers. He knew that the reason we got into this, Nick, is because he did Horror Express because he knew people on that set gambled, and he spent all his time gambling and he was a very, very professional and good gambler, so he could win lots and lots of money, sometimes twice as much as the fee he was being paid. He went on to Majesty, looked at George Lazenby with all of the money hanging out of his suitcase and thought, oh, easy pickings, which it was. He fleeced George Lazenby all the money that had been given in the suitcase within a day. Yeah, took every penny of it. George Lazenby then told some of the people on the stunt team and what have you. It got back to the producers. The producers went apeshit. And not Broccoli, but Saltzman came back. Saltzman was a really good gambler, and he said, I'm not having you do that again, but what we're going to do, if you're going to stay here, you're going to gamble with me, and we are going to have a gamble between ourselves. Saltzman won every penny back. Amazing.
Did he give it back to George?
No one's ever known.
That would be a no then.
Yeah, no one's ever known. But yeah, he won back. But it's never, in all the times I've read that, in various books that I've read it in, it's never said, and then gave the money back to Lazenby.
Oh,
so
wow.
We'll have to ask him, if we ever get to speak to him again, or I'll ask his manager, did he ever get the money back? And I'll let you know.
Oh,
there you go.
Cool.
So we've touched on all the main guys there. Let's quickly touch on the girls, shall we? I've got to rephrase that. My daughter's walking past again. That's going to sound terrible. Let's talk about the girls again. So you've got the wonderful Angels of Death, which is such a great part of this film. And we should start with Angela Schuyler, who's great, as Ruby Bartlett, who's the most un-Bond girl that there is. You like her, don't you, John? Ruby Bartlett.
Yes, Ruby. Yeah, she was also in Casino Royale, wasn't she?
She was, yeah, and she's much better than that. She's much better in Casino Royale than what she is, but she's great in this, though. She's the girl that sort of, felt the sausage, as we were talking about earlier on. But, it really is tragic because she killed herself by swallowing, she was a manic depressive and killed herself by swallowing, I think it was drain fluid. She, really horrific. And Leslie Phillips found her with all her throat burnt out and stuff. It really is an awful thing that happened to her. It's very, very sad because she's so bright and vibrant. And as you say, John, in Casino Royale, she's great in it as the daughter. She's fantastic. And like Roger Moore and, Susanna York gets in the bath with David Niven as Bond in that. But, yeah, she was really good in it. She's really, really good. And then, obviously, you've got Catherine Schnell, who we'll probably know from Space 1999.
Catherine Von Schnell.
The animals.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, she was a lot of fun in this. And, that's the thing.
Didn't she request to see the book on the Bezants?
Yes,
that's right.
She's
yes,
the one
gold
yes.
balls. Yes.
What's the fascination with gold balls? Yeah.
Well, because he's got 4 of them. Remember, which I thought was funny because they had this whole implied thing that the character, the heraldry guy he was supposed to be playing was kind of supposed to be gay. And so they were kind of playing it off that he's safe to be around all these girls. And it was sort of like dropping the fox into the hen house to watch the chickens. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
But that's the great thing about it. You've got Joanna Lumley, who is a huge star of it. Out of all the girls in this, Joanna Lumley, in this country at least, is the biggest star of the lot. And she's in a tiny part, but she says at one point, well, I know what he's allergic to. And obviously she became an Avenger herself, just like Diana Rigg had been. She became Purdy in the New Avengers in the 70s. So, there was all this, there's always an amazing connection with the Avengers and Bond, because you had Honor Blackman as Pussy Galore. She was one of the Avengers. You then had Diana Rigg, who was Emma Peel. She was one of the Avengers. She was in a Bond film. You then had Joanna Lumley as Purdy. She was an Avenger, but she was in a Bond movie first. So unlike the others, she was in a Bond movie first and then became an Avenger. And then one of our favourite characters in the series, Patrick Macnee, who was John Steed, in A View to a Kill, where he was, the wonderful chauffeur and head. So, Tibbet. So, you know, it's great that there's always the connection between the two franchises there, which I always like. I always liked that. And Julie Edge was one of the girls in that as well. And she was supposed to be one of the big stars at the time. She was in a lot of Hammer stuff. Incredibly striking looking woman. And everyone thought she was going to be the big star, but she did a couple of Hammer movies, you know, I think Creatures of Time Forgot or something, but didn't do a huge amount really. But the other thing is as well, that the one girl that's worth touching on as well is Jenny Hanley, who's one of the girls in here as well, because she obviously she was in all sorts of stuff. I mean, she was in, the Persuaders and UFO and all kinds of stuff. She's lovely. She's always at conventions. And she was in the Hammer movie Scars of Dracula, where she's gorgeous in that. And she's such a sweetheart, Jenny Hanley.
She's in the Persuaders, too, wasn't she?
Yeah, she's in the Persuaders. I think everyone was in the Persuaders, Mary, to be honest, you know, at one time or another. You know, none of us were, but, you know, that's you know, we're in a minority. But, yeah, it's you know, it's worth mentioning those girls. And I love the Angel of Death thing. And as you touched on, John, earlier on, or it might be you, Nick, the fact that they're sending a virus which is going to spread across each, you know, nation is quite frightening when you think of just how close it is to what's happening at the moment, really.
Well, and it's a very insidious way they're going to do it, too, because the virus is going to be, you know, it's an infertility, it basically causes sterility.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a double thing because, okay, they're going to use it to cause sterility in farm animals. And so the idea is that they'll cause mass hunger. But I also felt like it was a poke at James Bond that he was threatening sterility. You know, James Bond, the most virile agent ever, you know, and this guy's threatening to sterilize the world? Oh, my God.
I never thought about it that way, but you're right. Yeah, that might be you know, one of the reasons why they're saying it. You know, the most virile person was the person who instigated the sterility. Very interesting. Yeah.
Well, and the fact that he was going to have the ladies spread it too, that was even worse. And you know, for his part, Lazenby tried desperately to make sure that sterility wasn't a problem there at the Institute. So, you know.
But they also get it wrong because, you know, they say you're allergic. You know, do you remember when you were allergic to chicken, but now you love the taste of its flesh? If you're allergic to something, even if you're given some kind of therapy like Blofeld does, you're still allergic to it. So they got the wording wrong on that. They should have said, you know, you didn't like it, but they shouldn't say you're allergic to it because Ruby Bartlett would still be allergic to chicken. You know, it doesn't matter what you do with your mind; it's your body that's allergic to it. So, you know, that didn't make sense, and that's something that should have been picked up by the scriptwriters.
I thought part of it was he was giving them shots too.
Well, even then, your body would still react. You know, I think it's strange that they had that in there. You know, but it's always worth just watching it to see Miss Jamaica eat that corn on the cob. That's the scene I always look forward to.
Well, that's it. I mean, my God, what kind of therapy is that? Hey, every meal is going to be the stuff you're allergic to.
It is, Chris, but it's a wonderful idea. But that bit where the music comes in, and you know, and on the soundtrack, it's absolutely fantastic. It's the way you know, it just swells up. The soundtrack is wonderful and really makes it. You know, it's really great.
I thought you would have liked the girl eating the banana myself.
Well, I thought it was corn on the cob. I remember.
Well, there was a corn on the cob.
There was corn on the cob.
The banana that reminded you of the monkeys.
The Jamaican girl eats the banana.
Yeah, the Jamaican girl. Yeah, the way she eats it. It's just like it should have been an X certificate slapped on it right there.
Yeah,
quite amazing.
It was just a banana.
Think about your monkeys film now.
Exactly.
Didn't they dub all their voices?
No, they're the real voices.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, they did dub Lazenby's for all those scenes.
Lazenby's,
because
from the time Lazenby got in the helicopter onwards, that's all George Baker. That's all dubbed, yeah. Right up to the very end.
I didn't catch that at all, that was dubbed.
Yeah.
I'm not a sporting man,
Lazenby was very unhappy with it. That's one of the reasons why he was in a strop. When he saw it and he found out that he was dubbed so much, he was very, very upset.
Well, like I said, you know, he had more dialogue in that cover character than he did through the rest of the movie as James Bond. So yeah, you know.
Yeah, and it's worth touching on. And I know your favourite character, John, is Ilma Bunt. You really like her, don't you? Can you quickly do a quick impression of what that was like?
Ice.
Not Snow Ice. She sounds like a female Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I will pass the book around.
Yeah, it must be fair.
It must be fair.
I'm sorry, I always ask John to do that impression at Christmas. It's just one of the things I always look forward to it. And the sad thing is she died 2 weeks after it stopped filming, didn't it? She never got to see it.
Wow.
Weird. Yeah.
Yeah, very sad.
Yeah.
She was great in it. But how can you mistake Ruby Bartlett for Fräulein Bunt when you go see it, or where he goes into the room? She's twice the size. I mean, I don't know how they got away with that. But it's great because it has that great psychedelic sequence where he goes in and she's been, she's having the therapy, and it goes, I will tell you how and I will tell you when. That's the most psychedelic scene in any James Bond film, John. And, with the colours and everything, you're right, it's pure 60s.
Oh, no, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's pretty much most of the really cool folks. I mean, there was the stock Bond folks. There was Bernard Lee as M, and Desmond Llewellyn as Q, and Louise Maxwell as Moneypenny. But
yeah, and they got to get out the office this time as well. And you can see Moneypenny cry. So it's a good role for Moneypenny in this film. It's really, really good.
And this was Q's house too.
No, M's house. You get to see Quarterdeck.
Okay. I love the sequence where he knows about all the butterflies. Just sort of that's a wonderful scene.
Polydorus.
Yeah.
Yes. I didn't know your subject was lepidoptery, James. Yeah, very good. I love that scene.
Yeah. That's a great scene.
Because
you don't see M's house often, do you?
Well, never.
No.
And in the later movie, she's in a flat. Her
yeah,
house
you
is
see
a flat.
Judi Dench's flat, don't you?
Yeah, but strangely enough, another bit of lovely triv is the fact that in Skyfall, where they go back and he's sitting in M's flat, and she goes, "How did you get?" And he says, "I'm enjoying death." In real life, that's John Barry's flat, Cadogan Square.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah, useless bit of trivia, but worth dropping in at that point.
No, that's fun. So, are there any other cast members we want to hit?
No, but what I kind of missed was all the gadgets.
Oh, I think this movie worked all the better for not having gadgets, because You Only Live Twice, my favourite Bond film. Yeah, I know you like it, Nick, but very, very.
Oh, I love it.
It crops up very, very seldom in anyone's top 10, but it's my favourite because of the music, the way it looks, its location, everything about You Only Live Twice I love. But I think they did the bit with with the volcano and Little Nelly, and I think that they'd hit a point where they thought we can't take this anymore. And when you think about it, Diamonds Are Forever hasn't got a massive amount of gadgets in it either. And when you get to Live and Let Die, that hasn't got a massive amount of gadgets. In fact, Q's not even in Live and Let Die.
Yeah.
That's how little gadgets are used. Q is not even in Little Let Die, which is the only time Q's not in a Bond film. So they'd gone off the whole thing. So after You Only Live Twice, where they thought, people were saying, they've taken it so far, it's, they sort of backed off the big gadgets, right up, and then Spy Who Loved Me, obviously, it came back with, the ticker tape watch and everything, and that's what everyone wanted, and the car that goes underwater, and that's what people associate, it's like people associate, Elvis with his jumpsuits. He only wore those for 3 years, but they associate, they'll always associate 70s Bond with underwater cars and ticker tape watches and all the huge things that, Bondolers and all this kind of stuff that Roger Moore brought to the game. But really, there wasn't a huge amount of gadgets there. And the Majestic Service uses very little gadget because it's got such a great story to follow. It doesn't need gadgets.
Yeah.
It doesn't need any of them. It just needs a good skier, And when you think about it,
that's true. Well, and on that, do we want to go ahead and hit the quick plot summary on this?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because this is one of the Bond films that it starts out not very Bond filmy.
Well, so, just before you go into it, Nick, it's worth pointing out we're talking about George, and does he have his stand alone? He's the only Bond that in the gun barrel drops to his knee. So even then, he was given a signature note, because obviously you've got Connery had his hat on, even though it was Bob Simmons for the first few. But Lazenby's the only one that drops on his knees, so he did give that little bit of virility, I thought, and a bit of youth to that bit, and it's the only Bond gun barrel which goes fully red.
Yeah.
That's true.
I just love how they did it in the credits with all those
it's great
flashbacks.
the way it goes across. Well, they've used that in Dr. No. So again, like the introduction of Lazenby, the bit where the gun barrel stops and goes along again, that was in the first film, Dr. No, and they did it again for this one. But again, the soundtrack is just magnificent.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Well, and so the film starts out, and again, we touched on this. It starts almost exactly like the Dr. No, with, the close-up and the cigarette smoking for Bond. And you can't see his face, but you see he's driving along, and a woman in a, what was it? It was a really cool 1969 Mercury Cougar XR7, which was a totally cool car. I'm really glad they had that in the movie. She comes barreling up behind him and just zips past him. Well, of course, this trips James Bond's automatic woman hound mode, and so he starts chasing after her. Well, he sees the car parked on the beach, and he sees her, and she's in this kind of flowing dress and not exactly what you would call beach wear. And then she starts walking very deliberately into the ocean. And as anybody might know, that's a very common way to commit suicide, I think, or at least it is in movies.
It is in movies.
When a woman wants to kill herself and she lives near the sea, she will just walk into the ocean. To me, that seems like the silliest way to commit suicide. But don't get me started there. But Bond, he figures out pretty quickly that she's not going for a swim dressed like that. So he hops out of the car and runs into the water after her and saves her. He drags her out of the water, and then he's immediately assaulted by two guys. And you have no idea why he's being assaulted by them, but he ends up having a fight with them. And they distract him long enough before he vanquishes them that she is able to get away. And that's when he stands up and, she hops in his car, which he's driven partway onto the beach, drives it up to where she left her car. So he definitely can't catch her because he's got to walk a couple of 100 yards to pick up his car before he could even start after her. So, he's just kind of lost it. And that's when he does that little breaking of the fourth wall and just says, this never happened to the other guy. And, then we go into the iconic Bond credits like you described. And these were some interesting credits because they did show a lot of the Bond women and a lot of the Bond villains from the previous films.
Yeah, it was cool.
And it was very cool, but it really avoided showing Sean Connery a lot.
That's true.
So it didn't show him at all.
The beauty about it is the theme. As again, going back to it, the reason why it is instrumental is because John Barry was really getting into electronic music and everything, and this was one of the great, musical scores ever. But he thought that the title, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, was far too long to have a lyric. So that's why it was instrumental. And it was the first time since From Russia with Love that you actually had an instrumental as the opening credit. So it's great. And just while we're on music, again, a tip of the hat to the wonderful Leslie Brooksy, who died last month, who gave us, obviously, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He also gave us You Only Live Twice and Goldfinger, one of the great lyricists of all time. And I really would like to mention him because he was a lovely guy. And married to the girl who was carried off by Oliver Reed as the werewolf in Hammer's Curse of the Werewolf.
I didn't realize that.
They're gorgeous. I used to see them at conventions, and I supplied a picture of them that they liked for his. They're having a celebration of his life, and I'm off to Pinewood in January to. They're going to celebrate Leslie, but also the guy called Alan R. Tompkins, who I wanted to get on here before. He was the guy who did all the Keep, who died last year. It's been a terrible year for losing not just Bond people, but it's been a terrible year, full stop, for losing people. And he was one of my favourite people I ever met. And so I'm going into the office for the first time when I'm going to meet John, just before I meet John on Friday. And I'm digging out some images to send that they're going to send to Pinewood. And it's lovely because Barbara Broccoli is organising a remembrance for him at Pinewood with his wife. And so I'm very privileged to be going off for that because I truly adored those people, and Alan was one of my favourites. So it's worth mentioning those two wonderful people who were involved while we've got the chance with the Bond franchise, because without them, they wouldn't be the movies we love.
True.
Oh man, and that's true.
And worth mentioning my big buddy as well, while we're talking about it, who we lost this year, John Richardson, who because he obviously screen tested as Bond, and told me the wonderful stories about being put up in the Dorchester for a night and walking in and doing it, and knowing he wasn't right for the part and that Lazenby should have it. He was a wonderful man, and it would have been interesting to see John as James Bond. But it's amazing. Just to quickly, before you get into the movie, his partner said that John wanted to leave me his portfolio because he was an amazing photographer, and I drove down recently and they've kindly John left his portfolio of all these images to me in his will. So I'm very
wow.
thrilled about
amazing.
that. So that will be used, hopefully. If I can try and do a book, I'm going to speak to John about it, John Sadler, who's on the other side now, because we're going to start off doing a few things, and we're going to see what we can do with that.
That's really cool, Mark, and we're looking forward to hearing more about these projects, especially if you can get that book thing going. Going back to the synopsis, so at this point, Bond has been, sort of rejected by Tracy. This is kind of surprising. Like you said, this never happened to the other guy. Usually by this point, he's, got her off somewhere shagging because he saved her from, some attackers. But whatever the case, he heads on to his hotel, and there in the parking lot, he sees the 1969 Mercury Cougar XR7 that Tracy was driving. Now, this car kind of stands out in Europe for a lot of reasons, but the big one it's a Mercury Cougar in Europe, and you just didn't see that many of those compared to the States at the time. So anyway, he asks at the desk whose car it is and finds out that, it's Tracy, and he finds out that, she's there at the hotel as one of the guests, I guess, just hanging out, whatever. And he decides, okay, well, so much for that. But then that night, because, he's James Bond, he cannot not go to the casino and play baccarat, or however you say it, which is that strange blackjack game that they always play in James Bond movies that I've never been anywhere where I've seen anyone actually play it. Then again, I've never been to a casino in Europe, so, but it's blackjack, essentially, as far as I can tell. But anyway, he's playing, and suddenly the Countess Teresa de Vincenzo comes up. And she doesn't come up to him. She's actually on the other side of the table. And she places a large bet and immediately loses. And after she's placed the bet, she just kind of motions for the maitre d' or whatever to come over. And she's like, I don't have any money. And he's like, this isn't possible. What? Fortunately, Bond had been having a really good run, and he just said, oh, forgive me, I forgot, I'm covering for my partner. And so yet again, he saves her. Well, this time Teresa's like, okay, I guess I'll let you have my hotel room key then to thank you. And unfortunately for Bond, when he arrives, he's attacked by another unidentified man. After subduing the man, he returns to his own room. There he finds Tracy. Now, Tracy says she did not know there was an attacker there. But whatever. And they have some very interesting discourse about the fact that she always pays her debts and he doesn't take a woman as debt and things like that. Does not stop him from sleeping with her, though. Surprisingly enough, though, she's gone the next morning. So no matter how great Bond was, he wasn't that great, because usually he's the one that slips out on the lady. Anyway, Bond is kidnapped right after that by several men, including the one he fought the night before. Well, they take him to Marc-Ange Draco, the head of the European crime syndicate. And Draco reveals that Tracy is his only daughter, and he tells Bond that she's had a troubled past and a troubled upbringing, and since Bond is such a manly man, he wants Bond to marry his daughter, seduce her and marry her, and then make her your own and blah, 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 because, he's, I guess, a, Spanish guy, and he's very much into this idea that, you take a woman and you make her your own, whatever. So, a little bit troubling, but Bond says, look, I'm not going to do it for money. And he was offered £1 million, by the way, as a dowry. But Draco has information also, and Bond is still trying to find Spectre. and particularly Ernst Stravo Blofeld. So he decides to offer that information in exchange for Bond courting his daughter. He still is reluctant, but then he returns to London, and in London, M relieves him of his mission to assassinate Blofeld. Well, Bond is, needless to say, unhappy about this, so he dictates a resignation letter to Moneypenny. She alters it into a request for time off, and Bond heads down to Portugal, for Draco's birthday party, which he's been invited to because Draco's kind of like, hey, think it over. Well, there, Bond and Tracy actually begin this kind of whirlwind romance, because it starts out with Tracy finding out from her dad's girlfriend that he's actually going to give Bond information in exchange for seducing her. Well, she says she's nobody's prize and makes her dad give Bond the information about Blofeld. This impresses Bond, and I think he likes her more than he even wants to admit. They begin a genuine whirlwind romance, and we have this montage of them horseback riding and walking by fountains and being all lovey-dovey and blah, blah, blah. Well, in the middle of this couple of weeks of dating bliss, Bond gets dropped off at a law firm in Switzerland, which happens to be the clue that Draco found about Blofeld. Turns out that Blofeld has hired a Swiss lawyer to work with him on his correspondence with the College of Arms in London, specifically a genealogist named Sir Hilary Bray, so he can claim the title of Count Balthazar de Beauchamp. Well, this is the first really good lead that Bond has gotten, so he goes back to M and explains to him that he can do this. The College of Heraldry decides to help out, so Bond takes a sabbatical from dating Tracy to go and pretend to be Sir Hilary Bray, and he goes to Blofeld's Allergy Research Institute, which is atop Piz Gloria in the Swiss Alps. It's like this private resort on top of a mountain. And there Bond meets the 12 Angels of Death. And they're all women from all over the world who are patients at the clinic who are apparently, quote-unquote, cured of their allergies. Well, of course, Bond being Bond, and even though he's in a very good relationship with Tracy, he still goes out and seduces one of the girls, I think a British girl named Ruby, and he then realizes, because he's in the room with her, that at midnight the 12 ladies go into this kind of hypnotic trance when all this psychedelic light show stuff starts in their room. And it's that point that Blofeld starts giving them instructions, and he's basically brainwashing these women to make them into bacteriological warfare agents so that he can have them disperse his ultimate doomsday weapon, which is the ability to make crops or animals, more specifically, sterile. So imagine if he were to eliminate the entire cow population in Europe. Yeah, that could really hurt the food chain. And of course, it's only one step up from, making animals sterile to making selected sets of people sterile. So this is pretty terrifying. But anyhow, Bond actually is trying to trick and this is another thing. So Blofeld just sort of doesn't recognize Bond, even though they've met each other. Sure, why not? Bond does wear a kilt, so of course he's unrecognizable. But anyway, he is trying to convince Blofeld to leave Switzerland. That way MI6 can arrest him without violating Swiss sovereignty. But Blofeld, he refuses, and eventually Bond is caught because he's still trying to sleep with all the women, but the way he gets caught is because he screws up one of the places he's talking to Blofeld about. And so Blofeld figures out, oh, this must be James Bond, even though I didn't recognize him before. So, and of course, they don't just kill Bond, because now he's going to be a hostage. So they lock him in the most impractical room to lock a guy in, who's a daredevil like Bond, which is
the room with all the machinery for the chairlift or the sky lift that takes the gondolas up and down the mountain. So Bond, of course, has a couple of near misses there, but he manages to escape and has this spectacular ski chase down the mountain there at Piaz Gloria. And he arrives at this little village, which is in the middle of celebrating Christmas. And this is what we were talking about earlier. He is being hunted by dozens of Blofeld's men. He's alone, he's broke, he has nothing, and he's just sitting there trying not to be noticed right next to an ice skating rink when out of the blue, Tracy just skates right up to him. And it turns out that she'd followed him to that part of Switzerland and was just waiting for him down at the bottom of the hill. And so they escape in her Cougar. Well, there's a car chase, but then they get away there, but a blizzard forces them to take shelter in a barn. It's at that point that Bond decides that he really does love Tracy, and he proposes to her. She says yes. They have a night of bonding, and the next morning they go off on skis because I guess the car would be too practical to take. But Blofeld and his men show up just in time to not catch them, but to be close enough to see that they're getting away. So Blofeld sends some of his men after them, but when he doesn't think they can be caught, he just triggers an avalanche by shooting his gun up into the mountains. In the middle of the avalanche, Tracy is captured, but Bond manages to escape. So back in London and M's office, Bond is told that Blofeld intends to hold the world for ransom by threatening to destroy the agriculture with his brainwashed women, and he demands, weirdly enough, just amnesty for his past crimes, and that he be recognized as the current Count de Blochamp. M tells 007 that the ransom will be paid and actually forbids him from mounting a rescue. Bond does not take that very well, needless to say. Oh, and by the way, Blofeld is keeping Tracy because he figures now he's got her as a hostage. So, fortunately for Bond, Tracy's dad is an organized crime boss who also owns a lot of legitimate businesses, including big construction companies. So Draco puts together an assault team and some Huey helicopters, paints him up like he's a Red Cross missionary trip, and they fly up to Blofeld's headquarters, and your typical big Bond battle starts up at the top of the mountain. The facility's destroyed. They manage to destroy the way that they communicate with the Angels of Death. So for all intents and purposes, the bacteriological threat is neutralized, and that's that. So, and there's a big, bobsled chase where Blofeld is escaping and Bond pursues him, and the chase ends when Blofeld becomes snared in a tree branch by his neck, and you think that he may be dead. So, okay, folks, and this is, spoiler time. Bond and Tracy marry in Portugal, and it's a very touching scene, and Bond says farewell to all of his, there's Q and M and Moneypenny, and Moneypenny catches the bouquet, of course, and they drive away in Bond's Aston Martin, and they're talking about their future and how many kids they're going to have, and literally how they have all the time in the world. But the car is all decorated in all these flowers, and they're getting honked at by people, so Bond pulls over, and, he's taking the flowers off the car, and Tracy's there talking to him. Well, all of a sudden, Blofeld and his henchwoman, Bunt, come driving by. And they start shooting out of the car. Apparently Blofeld's in a neck brace, but he survived. Unfortunately, the drive-by shooting at any other point in a movie like this would, just anger Bond, and that would be that. But, Tracy actually dies. She got shot in the forehead. And at this point, Bond is in the car, and he's just holding her, and she's passed. And a Portuguese police officer comes up, and it's a really touching scene because Bond just sits there and says, no, she's just sleeping. We just got married. We have all the time in the world. And that's the movie. So, I think,
wonderful.
What's so funny, Mary?
You did such a good job.
That's
always
it.
Brilliant, Nick. Always.
Yes.
So, we can round up by saying, the one thing about Mary, well, I always normally ask us at the beginning, but did you like this film?
Yes. Yes, because of Diana Rigg. I loved that character. I loved her energy. Yeah. And I don't think I've ever seen it before. It could be because Vince...
It's one a lot of people haven't.
Vince was such a Sean Connery fan that.
Well, this is the one that slips through the cracks a lot.
Yeah. So I'm glad I saw it.
I mean, it's because, perhaps it was a new Bond, people weren't ready for that, but I mean, the good thing about people who lived in Germany and Italy, it didn't affect them too much because it was the same actor who dubbed George Lazenby as what had dubbed Sean Connery, so the voice was always the same, right up through Roger Moore, so that never changed. The face did, but not the voice. But there you go. But we know why you love it, John, and it's just because obviously it's got a really important part in your life as a whole, talking about, meeting your wife and everything else. It's quite amazing, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely added an extra element to it, but I love the film anyway. And I love skiing, I love Christmas, I love John Barry. What's not to love?
Exactly, and on that
there's
note,
a whole lot in this.
Love? That is true. The world is not enough, which is actually quoted in this film, isn't it? That's his motto.
Yeah.
Which I've always liked, isn't it? That they say, what do they say? The orbis non sufficient or something. The world is not enough, which is quoted for the first time in this film as his coat of arms.
Absolutely.
Which was referenced nicely in the Pierce Brosnan years. So yeah, so it's a great film all round. It really is, and deserves to be up there. And it's either seen now as either the or the second to Goldfinger, and most people's versions of the best Bond films. I think we all have different favourite Bond films. Because the time we saw them, we've discussed this before, but, it is without doubt one of the very best, and I think Lazenby should be proud that the one that he did do, most people really, truly love, so, and it only grows with stature every year, to be honest, and the fact that it was referenced so much in what is obviously a very important movie in the franchise with No Time to Die, says enough about the film, really, in itself.
Definitely.
Okay.
Skyfall!
Yeah, well, that's in Skyfall.
Skyfall!
I hate that theme song.
Oh!
You're joking. You don't like Skyfall?
I love the song, but I hate the way she sang it.
Oh, right, okay.
Because she
have no response to that, Mary.
At the end all the time, and it just seems off-key to me.
Well, Mary, thank you for making my version of Gold sound fantastic.
What do you think?
And on that note,
I think the podcast should end with your rendition of Gold.
We will say our goodbyes. Listen, everyone, have a wonderful Christmas.
Yes.
Yes. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Happy
holidays.
How a Christmas trees grow.
And John, thank you so much for joining us. You have been a delight to have on the show, and you are welcome anytime.
Yes.
Thanks for having me, and I'd be grateful to come back, although I don't know anything about any other films, so...
Well, you do, John.
Neither do we, so it's fine.
But you have wonderful stories, so it doesn't matter.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys.
I'm Mark Straightman.
Yeah.
We all are.
Hey. Listen, everyone, have a wonderful Christmas. We'll put on, a great
he's allergic to.
What's Mark allergic
all the time in the world, that's the perfect one to end to, and we'll slot in. Do you know how Christmas trees are grown? But everybody have a great Christmas, and let's hope that 2022 is a better one for us all.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
And I want to know what Mark's allergic to.
I'm allergic to. What do you mean?
That was just a Joanna Lumley joke.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
I missed that. Okay, well, I can tell you, shellfish, crabs and mussels. There you go. So that's what if I was an angel of death, that's what I'd be on.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks, guys, and have a Merry Christmas.
Indeed. Merry Christmas, 007.
Bye, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Adios, Mafia.
Well, they've gone.
For good, John?
No, just for now. It wasn't the right time for us to meet. But there'll be other nights, other stars for us to watch. They'll be back.
The ghost are moving tonight, restless, hungry.
All right, fellas, here's your story.
Greetings, my friend. We are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And we cannot keep this a secret any longer.
Wait, Captain. I have found evidence of intelligent beings on this planet.
Look to the skies. It's the B-Movie Cookbook. Menus inspired by 15 of your favorite B-movies from the 1950s. With teenage werewolves, blobs, and enough cheese for everyone.
When we return to our planet, the High Court may well sentence you to torture.
But until then, we've got Ed Wood and Vincent Price.
There'll be food and drink and ghosts, and perhaps even a few murders. You're all invited.
So impress your friends with dinner and a movie with the B-Movie Cookbook. We've got you covered. Get your copy today at bmoviecookbook.com. That's bmoviecookbook.com.
Let me see that book. I am interested to see what sways your mind so heavily.
Sure thing. Just visit bmoviecookbook.com.
Anybody around here want some coffee?
Transmission.
The good guys always win, even in the 80s.